Imagine a world where the collective knowledge of entire civilizations could vanish in an instant, lost to fire, war, or simply the passage of time. We often hear about the legendary Library of Alexandria, but what about the other ancient libraries that stood as silent guardians of human thought? What about the ones hidden in desert caves, buried beneath volcanic ash, or built within remote monasteries? These places weren't just buildings, they were fortresses of ideas, protecting everything from revolutionary scientific theories to forbidden philosophical texts that challenged the very foundations of their societies. Throughout history, knowledge has always been fragile. A single spark could erase centuries of discovery. A change in political winds could condemn entire libraries to oblivion. And yet, against all odds, some of these treasure houses survived. They endured invasions, natural disasters, and deliberate attempts to erase them from memory. In this video, we're going to uncover these extraordinary places, the world's oldest libraries you've never heard of. We'll walk through their hidden chambers, examine the priceless manuscripts they protected, and meet the dedicated individuals who risked everything to preserve these texts for future generations. You'll discover how a sealed cave in China preserved the world's oldest printed book, how a villa buried by Mount Vesuvius safeguarded the only surviving library from classical antiquity, and how an isolated monastery in Egypt became an unexpected crossroads of Christian, Islamic, and Jewish scholarship. These stories aren't just about ancient books, they're about the enduring human drive to understand our world and preserve that understanding against all odds. As we navigate our own digital age with its unique challenges of information preservation, these forgotten libraries have never been more relevant. So join me on this journey through time as we explore how these hidden institutions shaped our understanding of history and why their legacy continues to resonate today. Deep within the arid cliffs of China's Gobi Desert, along the ancient Silk Road, lies a network of caves that became the unlikely guardian of one of history's most extraordinary literary treasures. This is the Mogau Grottoes at Dunhuang, a sacred site adorned with breathtaking Buddhist art, but its most profound secret remained hidden for nearly a millennium. Behind a single walled-up cave, forgotten by time, was a chamber overflowing with an estimated 40,000 manuscripts, scrolls, and paintings, a sealed library that served as a perfect time capsule of the Silk Road's vibrant intellectual and cultural exchange. The discovery of this treasure trove reads like something from an adventure novel. In the year 1900, a Taoist monk named Wang Yuanlu was conducting repairs within the cave complex when he noticed a hollow sound behind a section of wall. Upon investigating, he broke through to reveal a small, hidden chamber, barely larger than a closet, that was packed floor to ceiling with documents. These weren't just religious texts, this was the entire archive of the Silk Road. The dry desert air had acted as a perfect preservative, safeguarding these fragile papers for centuries. So what was inside this incredible collection? The diversity is almost unimaginable. There were, of course, thousands of Buddhist sutras, copied meticulously by scribes as acts of devotion. But alongside them were contracts for the sale of camels, personal letters filled with everyday gossip, mathematical equations, and even loan agreements with detailed interest rates. There were elaborate star charts mapping the heavens and medical texts describing complex procedures. Perhaps most famously, the library contained the Diamond Sutra, a Buddhist text dated to the year 868. It is not just a sacred scripture, it is the world's oldest dated printed book, produced with woodblock printing technology centuries before it appeared in Europe. These documents were written in a stunning array of languages, painting a picture of a remarkably interconnected world. Scholars have identified texts in Chinese, Tibetan, Sanskrit, Uyghur, and even the rare Sogdian and Khotanese languages, tongues spoken by merchants and travelers from long-vanished Central Asian kingdoms. This linguistic mosaic proves that Dunhuang was far more than a simple stop on a trade route. It was a bustling international hub where ideas, goods, and cultures met and melded. A single scroll might contain a Buddhist prayer in Sanskrit on one side and a student practice sheet for Chinese characters on the back, giving us an intimate glimpse into the life of a multilingual learner over 1,000 years ago. The very existence of this sealed library raises a fascinating historical mystery. Why was it walled up in the first place? The prevailing theory suggests that around the 11th century, as the region faced the threat of invasion, the monks of Mogau made the difficult decision to protect their most precious items. Rather than see their sacred and scholarly texts destroyed or looted, they carefully gathered them and hid them away in a single cave, sealing the entrance and covering it with a mural. They likely believed this would be a temporary measure, a safe hiding place until the danger passed. But the invaders stayed, or perhaps the knowledge of the cache was lost, and the library remained forgotten, silently waiting for its rediscovery centuries later. The secrets these scrolls hold about daily life are their true gift to history. We learn about the price of spices, the structure of merchant caravans, and the legal disputes that arose between travelers from different cultures. We read heartfelt letters from sons writing to their mothers from thousands of miles away. We see the concerns of ordinary people, their hopes, their debts, their spiritual beliefs. This hidden library doesn't just preserve official histories written by the powerful. It safeguards the voices of the Silk Road itself, the countless individuals whose journeys and interactions wove together the fabric of the ancient world. It is a humbling reminder that the flow of ideas has always been the most valuable commodity of all. While the monks of Dunhuang were protecting their scrolls in a sealed cave, another, far earlier library was being systematically built with an ambition that remains breathtaking even today. Long before the fame of Alexandria in the heart of the Neo-Assyrian Empire, a king conceived a project of staggering intellectual scope. This was Asher-Banepal, ruler of Nineveh in what is now modern Iraq, and he wasn't just a conqueror, he was perhaps history's first great bibliophile. His driving passion was to possess, quite literally, all the knowledge in the world as his empire knew it. He didn't merely want a personal collection, he sought to create a universal archive, a central brain for his entire civilization, and in doing so, he built the Library of Asher-Banepal, a collection that would become the single most important source for understanding the ancient Mesopotamian world. What set Asher-Banepal apart from other powerful rulers was his unique background. He was one of the few kings of his era who was actually literate, having been trained in the scribble arts during his youth. He could read and write in both Akkadian and Sumerian, the scholarly languages of the day, and this personal investment in learning fueled his obsessive quest for texts. He didn't just order his subordinates to gather tablets, he understood their intrinsic value. His method of acquisition was remarkably systematic. He sent scribes and agents to every corner of his empire, particularly to the ancient cultural centers of Babylon and Nippur, with a clear mission to seek out, copy, and bring back every significant text they could find. In some cases, he even demanded entire libraries from defeated states as part of his terms of surrender, effectively centralizing the knowledge of Mesopotamia into one immense repository. The sheer scale and diversity of the library's contents are difficult to overstate. Imagine a collection of over 30,000 cuneiform tablets, each one meticulously inscribed by hand, covering every conceivable aspect of human inquiry. There were detailed legal codes that laid out laws and their corresponding punishments, providing a window into the complex justice system of the time. Medical texts offered prescriptions and procedures, some involving herbs and others invoking spiritual incantations, showing the blend of science and belief that characterized healing practices. Astronomical records meticulously tracked the movements of planets and stars, which were used both for divination and for developing early calendars. There were dictionaries for translating between languages, lists of plants and animals, and administrative records detailing the economy of a vast empire. But among all these treasures, one work stands out for its profound cultural impact: the Epic of Gilgamesh. The library contained the most complete version of this epic poem, which follows the adventures of a legendary king and his quest for immortality. It is a story that explores universal themes of friendship, loss, and the human condition, and it includes a striking account of a great flood that bears remarkable similarities to the later biblical story of Noah. Without Asher-Banepal's library, this foundational piece of world literature might have been lost forever. Its preservation allows us to hear a narrative voice from over 4,000 years ago, reminding us that the questions we grapple with today are not so different from those that preoccupied our ancient ancestors. The survival of this library is a story of destruction leading to preservation. In 612 BC, a coalition of Babylonians and Medes sacked Nineveh. They burned the royal palaces to the ground, and in the inferno, the wooden shelves holding the clay tablets were consumed. Yet, in an incredible twist of fate, the intense heat from the fire actually baked and hardened the clay tablets, making them more durable than they had ever been before. Instead of dissolving into mud, they were fired like pottery, and the rubble of the palace collapsed over them, creating a protective layer that shielded them for over 2 millennia. They were not discovered until the 19th century by archaeologists who were astonished to find an entire state archive waiting to be read. The legacy of Ashur-Banipal's endeavor is immense. It provided the very foundation for the modern field of Assyriology, giving scholars the raw material to decipher cuneiform and finally understand the languages and history of Mesopotamia. His concept of a universal library, a place that aimed to bring together all written knowledge, set a powerful precedent that would inspire later institutions, including the famous Library of Alexandria. His story teaches us a powerful lesson about preservation. Sometimes the most enduring safekeeping happens not through careful curation, but through a fortunate accident of fate, a catastrophe that inadvertently becomes a time capsule. It shows us that the drive to collect and save knowledge is itself a fundamental human impulse, one that can outlast empires, fires, and the passage of centuries. While the desert sands of Dunhuang preserved their treasures through dryness, another library was saved by a far more violent and sudden act of nature. Just a few miles from the doomed city of Pompeii, the luxurious seaside town of Herculaneum also faced the full fury of Mount Vesuvius in 79 AD. But where Pompeii was buried under falling pumice and ash, Herculaneum was hit by a series of superheated pyroclastic surges, avalanches of gas and volcanic matter that instantly carbonized everything in their path. This horrific event, which flash-fried the town and its inhabitants, had an unexpected consequence. It created a perfect, if tragic, time capsule. And within one magnificent villa, it preserved the only intact library to have survived from the classical world. This sprawling estate, known today as the Villa of the Papary, was a palace of thought perched on the Bay of Naples. It was a monument to wealth and intellect, filled with breathtaking bronze and marble sculptures, elaborate mosaics, and colonnaded gardens. But its most priceless treasure was its extensive collection of papyrus scrolls, an estimated 1,800 of them housed in a dedicated library. The volcanic surges that engulfed the villa cooked these scrolls instantly, turning them into blocks of brittle, carbonized material that looked more like lumps of charcoal than books. For centuries, they were considered utterly unrecoverable, their secrets locked away by a layer of volcanic rock and their own fragile state. The identity of the villa's owner is a fascinating historical detective story. While we may never know for certain, the most compelling evidence points to Lucius Calpurnius Piso Caesoninus, a powerful Roman statesman who just so happened to be the father-in-law of Julius Caesar. Piso was a man of immense influence and, crucially, a known patron of philosophers. His suspected ownership adds a thrilling layer of context to the library's contents, suggesting this was not just any collection, but the personal working library of Rome's elite, a place where the most cutting-edge Greek ideas were studied and debated. For a long time, the only way to read these scrolls was the heartbreaking process of physically unrolling them, a method that often resulted in the scrolls crumbling into dust. Scholars of the 18th and 19th centuries managed to painstakingly unroll a few, revealing texts that were predominantly works of Greek philosophy, particularly from the Epicurean school. This makes perfect sense given the villa's suspected owner, the philosopher Philodemus, a leading Epicurean thinker, is believed to have lived and worked there, essentially serving as Piso's personal intellectual. His works on ethics, poetry, and theology, which were thought to be lost, began to emerge from the carbonized lumps. Today, the race to read the unreadable is being revolutionized by 21st century technology. Researchers are now using tools like multispectral imaging and high-resolution CT scans to peer inside the scrolls without ever touching them. These advanced techniques can detect the trace remains of ink on the carbonized papyrus, and sophisticated software can then virtually unroll the scrolls and map the letters onto a screen. It is a painstaking pixel-by-pixel process, but it has already begun to yield incredible results, revealing previously unknown texts and offering new fragments from known works. The potential of what remains hidden is what truly captures the imagination. This library represents a random snapshot of a first-century Roman intellectual's tastes. It is entirely possible that within these blackened lumps reside lost plays by Sophocles, unknown histories by Livy, or even early Christian writings. Every scroll successfully scanned is a chance to rewrite a small piece of our understanding of the ancient world, to hear a voice silenced for nearly 2,000 years. The Villa of the Papary is a constant, tantalizing reminder of how much we have lost from antiquity, and a beacon of hope that modern science can help us recover some of those lost words, offering a direct line to the thoughts and debates that animated the Roman elite on the very eve of their destruction. As the volcanic ash of Vesuvius settled over Herculaneum, entombing one library for centuries, another great repository of knowledge was just beginning its monumental rise in a new capital of empire. While the Western Roman Empire crumbled, succumbing to invasion and internal strife, its eastern counterpart was entering a golden age of preservation and scholarship. At the heart of this survival stood the Imperial Library of Constantinople, an institution that would single-handedly shoulder the immense responsibility of safeguarding the intellectual legacy of the classical world. Founded by Emperor Constantius II around the year 357 AD, this was not merely a collection of books. It was a deliberate, state-sponsored mission to create a fortress for knowledge, ensuring that the flame of Greek and Roman learning would not be extinguished by the gathering darkness of the early Middle Ages. The library's foundational vision was breathtaking in its scope and ambition. Emperor Constantius II, the son of Constantine the Great, understood that true imperial power was not just measured in military might or territorial control, but also in cultural and intellectual supremacy. He established the library within the sacred precincts of the imperial palace, a physical embodiment of the connection between knowledge and power. His goal was to centralize and protect the most important texts of the age, creating a definitive archive that would serve scholars, bureaucrats, and the imperial court itself. This was a proactive measure against the decay of time and the chaos of a fragmenting world. He dispatched agents across the Mediterranean with a clear directive: acquire every significant manuscript they could find. They scoured the scriptoriums of Alexandria, the academies of Athens, and the private collections of Roman patricians, bringing back priceless originals and copies to be housed in the security of the new capital. The true heroes of this story, however, were not the emperors who founded the library, but the countless unnamed scribes who dedicated their lives to its mission. For centuries, through sieges, plagues, and violent theological disputes, these meticulous copyists worked in dedicated scriptoriums, their pens scratching away by the light of oil lamps. Their task was one of monumental patience and precision: to create perfect copies of deteriorating papyrus scrolls onto a new, more durable medium parchment. This process of transcription was not mindless duplication. It was an act of preservation, of passing the torch. With each carefully formed Greek letter, they were ensuring that the works of Homer, the philosophies of Plato and Aristotle, the scientific theories of Euclid and Archimedes, and the historical narratives of Herodotus and Thucydides would survive for future generations. They were the human bridge across which the ideas of antiquity walked into the future. The collection itself was a mirror reflecting the entire spectrum of classical thought. Beyond the famous literary and philosophical works, the library housed vast repositories of practical knowledge that were essential for governing a complex empire. There were exhaustive legal codes, including the foundational Theodosian Code, which would later influence the famed Justinian Code, shaping the concept of law for centuries to come. Scientific and medical treatises offered detailed knowledge on everything from surgery and pharmacology to architecture and engineering. Historical chronicles provided meticulous accounts of past events, offering lessons and legitimacy to Byzantine rulers. This combination of the theoretical and the utterly practical made the library the administrative and intellectual engine of the Byzantine state. Inevitably, such a concentration of priceless artifacts became a target. The library's history is marked by a series of devastating fires and sacks that could easily have erased its contents forever. A major fire in the year 473 destroyed a significant portion of the original collection. Later, during the brutal Fourth Crusade in 1204, Latin Crusaders sacked Constantinople, and many manuscripts were looted, burned, or lost to the chaotic violence. Yet, each time disaster struck, the Byzantine commitment to preservation proved resilient. Emperors and scholars would work tirelessly to rebuild, to track down lost copies, and to begin the painstaking process of transcription all over again. This cycle of loss and recovery is a testament to the unwavering belief in the value of the knowledge they protected. The library's ultimate role as a bridge to the modern world was cemented not by its permanence in Constantinople, but by the diaspora of its scholars and its contents. As the Ottoman Turks closed in on the city in the 15th century, a wave of Byzantine scholars fled westward, carrying with them precious manuscripts from the imperial collections. They arrived in Italy, the birthplace of the Renaissance, and presented Italian humanists with a treasure they had never imagined: direct access to the original Greek texts of Plato, Aristotle, and countless others, unmediated by centuries of Latin translation and commentary. This influx of primary sources electrified the intellectual world of Europe, directly fueling the Renaissance and the rediscovery of classical humanism. The Imperial Library of Constantinople, through its centuries of diligent work, had kept the embers of antiquity glowing, ready to be fanned into a flame that would illuminate a new age of learning, art, and science in the West. While the Imperial Library of Constantinople was diligently copying Greek and Roman texts onto parchment, a different kind of intellectual revolution was taking shape over 2,000 miles to the southwest. In the bustling, vibrant city of Fez, Morocco, a remarkable woman named Fatima al-Fihri was about to found an institution that would not only preserve knowledge but actively generate it for over a millennium. Using her substantial inheritance, she established the University of Al-Karawayin in the year 859, and at its heart was a library that would become a luminous beacon of learning, shining its light across the medieval world. This wasn't just a collection of books, it was the engine of the world's oldest continuously operating degree-granting university, a place where the boundaries of astronomy, medicine, and law were being pushed forward while Europe was still in the early stages of its so-called Dark Ages. The story of Fatima al-Fihri herself is a powerful testament to the role of women in the Islamic Golden Age. She was the daughter of a wealthy merchant, and upon her father's passing, she and her sister inherited a considerable fortune. Rather than using this wealth for personal luxury, Fatima invested it entirely in her community, envisioning a center of education that would serve the people of Fez and beyond. She personally oversaw the construction of the mosque and university complex, and legend says she fasted throughout the entire building process as an act of devotion and dedication. Her vision created a sanctuary for scholarship that welcomed students regardless of their background, fostering an environment where the pursuit of knowledge was considered one of the highest forms of worship. This foundational spirit of inclusivity and devotion to learning would define the library for centuries. Stepping into the Qarawiyyin library was an experience designed to elevate the mind. The architecture itself was a reflection of the sacred importance of its contents. Intricate geometric mosaics adorned the walls, carved cedar woodwork filtered the sunlight, and cooling courtyards with central fountains created a serene atmosphere conducive to contemplation. The manuscripts were not merely stored, they were honored. They were housed in special wooden cases, often exquisitely crafted, and the library employed sophisticated preservation techniques that were centuries ahead of their time. Scribes and librarians used citrus oil to protect the precious pages from insects and decay, a natural remedy that proved remarkably effective. The very environment was meticulously controlled to combat the harsh Moroccan climate, ensuring that these fragile documents could survive for generations. This wasn't just logistics, it was a profound expression of reverence for the written word. The collection within these walls was nothing short of extraordinary. It held groundbreaking medical texts that detailed human anatomy and surgical procedures with astonishing accuracy, texts that would later form the basis of European medical schools. There were astronomical charts and treatises that mapped the stars with precision, aiding navigation and challenging existing understandings of the cosmos. Philosophical works by towering intellectuals like Ibn Rushd, known in the West as Averroes, were central to the curriculum. His commentaries on Aristotle sought to reconcile faith and reason, and when these works eventually reached Europe, they ignited fierce debates that helped lay the groundwork for the Renaissance. Similarly, the historical and sociological theories of Ibn Khaldun, another scholar associated with the region, provided frameworks for understanding the rise and fall of civilizations that remain influential today. This leads us to the library's most profound and lasting impact, its role as a critical bridge for the transmission of knowledge. For centuries, Al-Karawayin served as a magnetic hub for thinkers from across Africa, the Middle East, and Europe. Christian and Jewish scholars from medieval Spain and other parts of Europe traveled to Fez to study texts that were simply unavailable anywhere else. They pored over Arabic translations of Greek classics by Plato and Aristotle, which had been lost to Europe after the fall of Rome but preserved and expanded upon by Islamic scholars. These European visitors then translated these works from Arabic into Latin and Hebrew, bringing them back to centers of learning like Toledo and Bologna. In this way, the library at Qarawiyyin acted as a crucial filter and conduit, channeling the knowledge of the ancient world and the innovations of the Islamic Golden Age directly into the heart of an awakening Europe, helping to fuel the scientific revolution and the rebirth of classical learning that would reshape the Western world. As the intellectual currents of the Islamic Golden Age flowed from Fez across the Mediterranean, they converged in a new imperial capital where a different kind of knowledge repository was taking shape, one that reflected the absolute power and global ambition of the Ottoman Empire. Perched on a commanding headland overlooking the strategic confluence of the Bosphorus Strait and the Golden Horn, Topkapi Palace was far more than a sultan's residence. It was the administrative heart and symbolic brain of a vast multicultural empire. And within its labyrinthine courtyards and opulent chambers, hidden away in buildings designed for both beauty and security, was the Enderun Library, a collection that served as the ultimate instrument of statecraft, cultural patronage, and imperial memory for the Ottoman dynasty. The very location of this library within the palace reveals its profound significance. It was situated in the third court within the highly restricted Enderun, or Inner Palace. This was the exclusive domain of the Sultan, his family, and the elite cadre of officials and pages who were being groomed for the highest positions in the empire. Access was a privilege granted to a select few. This wasn't a public institution. It was the sovereign's private arsenal of knowledge, a tool for governing a diverse and sprawling realm that stretched from the gates of Vienna to the shores of the Persian Gulf. The books housed here were consulted to make weighty decisions on law, warfare, and diplomacy, making the library a silent but critical participant in the course of Ottoman history. At the core of its collection were texts that defined the spiritual and legal foundations of the state. The library held some of the most exquisite Qurans ever produced, including the renowned Topkapi manuscript, a strong candidate for one of the oldest surviving complete copies. This manuscript, written in a majestic early Hijazi script, is more than a religious artifact. It is a symbol of the Caliphate's authority, a tangible link to the time of the Prophet Muhammad that legitimized the Ottoman Sultan's claim to leadership of the Islamic world. Alongside these sacred texts were vast collections of imperial decrees, known as firmans, and detailed legal opinions or fatwas. These documents were the practical machinery of governance, outlining tax policies, settling land disputes, appointing governors, and articulating the empire's official stance on everything from trade agreements to theological controversies. To read these decrees is to hear the voice of the state itself, issuing commands that would ripple across 3 continents. Beyond the dry language of law and administration, the library preserved the empire's soul through its breathtaking artistic achievements. The Ottoman court was a magnificent patron of the book arts, and the library's collection of illuminated manuscripts represents the pinnacle of this tradition. Workshops of master calligraphers, illustrators, bookbinders, and gilders worked under the direct patronage of the Sultan to produce works of staggering beauty. The pages of historical chronicles, like the lavishly illustrated surname-I Humayun, depict imperial festivals and ceremonies in vibrant miniatures, capturing the splendor and power of the court in exquisite detail. Poetic works were transformed into visual feasts, where the elegant curves of Arabic script were intertwined with delicate floral patterns and scenes from daily life. These were not merely books, they were declarations of cultural refinement and imperial prestige. Perhaps most revealing are the personal journals and correspondence of the sultans themselves, which the library guarded like state secrets. The private writings of a figure like Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent offer an intimate glimpse into the mind of a ruler who saw himself as both a fearsome conqueror and a divinely guided poet. In his diaries, we find not just battle strategies and political calculations, but also moments of doubt, grief over the loss of a child, and passionate love letters to his wife, Hurrem Sultan. These humanizing documents complicate the monolithic image of the all-powerful sultan, showing us the individual man beneath the crown, grappling with the immense weight of his office. They reveal how personal faith, family dynamics, and artistic sensibilities directly influenced the political trajectory of one of the world's most powerful empires. The library's role extended beyond the borders of the known world, thanks to its impressive collection of maps and navigational charts. As Ottoman admirals and explorers ventured into new seas, they brought back knowledge that was meticulously recorded and stored in Topkapi. The famous map by the Ottoman admiral Papary, drawn in 1513, and based on sources including captured Portuguese charts and possibly even maps from the time of Alexander the Great, is a testament to this global curiosity. It depicts the coastlines of Europe, Africa, and the Americas with an accuracy that astonished modern scholars. Holding such a map in the library allowed the Ottoman court to visualize the entire world, planning naval campaigns, trade routes, and diplomatic missions with a truly global perspective. This geographic intelligence was a key asset in the empire's rivalry with the European powers of the Age of Exploration. The enduring influence of the Topkapi Library is found in the very fabric of modern Turkey and the broader Islamic world. The legal precedent set down in its firmans shaped administrative practices for centuries. The artistic styles perfected in its manuscripts influenced architecture, tile work, and design across the empire, leaving a lasting aesthetic legacy. Most importantly, the library stands as a monumental record of a sophisticated, bureaucratic, and culturally rich empire that saw itself as the heir to both Roman imperial power and Islamic scholarly tradition. It wasn't just a storehouse of old books, it was the central processor for the vast and complex organism that was the Ottoman Empire, a place where knowledge was curated, created, and constantly consulted to steer the course of history. High on a wind-swept plateau in the Guadarrama Mountains northwest of Madrid, a monolithic complex of granite and slate rises with an air of severe majesty. This is El Escorial, part palace, part monastery, part mausoleum, and home to one of the most paradoxical libraries ever conceived. Built by the deeply devout and formidable King Philip II of Spain in the 16th century, the royal library within was designed with a dual, almost contradictory purpose: to serve as a universal repository of all human knowledge while simultaneously operating at the very heart of the Spanish Inquisition's intellectual sphere. It was a fortress of learning built by a king who saw himself as the primary defender of global Catholic orthodoxy, creating a fascinating tension between the pursuit of knowledge and the enforcement of dogma. King Philip's vision for the library was immense, reflecting both his personal piety and his imperial ambition. Following a decisive victory over the French at the Battle of St. Quentin in 1557, he vowed to build a grand monastery dedicated to St. Lawrence, and the resulting El Escorial complex became the center of his world empire. The library was its intellectual crown jewel. Philip was not just a collector, he was an obsessive acquirer, He issued royal decrees instructing Spanish ship captains to seize any interesting books they encountered in foreign ports. He sent agents across Europe to purchase entire private collections from scholars and nobles. He even negotiated with the Ottoman Sultan for the acquisition of precious Greek and Arabic manuscripts. His goal was to gather every significant work of science, theology, history, and philosophy under one roof, creating a complete encyclopedia of human thought in physical form. This was the age of exploration, and just as his conquistadors were mapping the New World, Philip sought to map the entire known universe of ideas. The physical space of the library itself was a dramatic departure from the dark, cloistered scriptoriums of medieval monasteries. Designed to awe and inspire, it is a breathtaking hall over 200 feet long, with a vaulted ceiling covered in vibrant frescoes depicting the 7 liberal arts: grammar, rhetoric, dialectic, music, arithmetic, geometry, and astronomy. The shelves, made of rich, exotic woods from the Americas, were not placed against the walls as was customary. Instead, they were built as freestanding cases, with the books displayed with their beautifully decorated 4 edges facing outward, turning the entire room into a magnificent gallery of knowledge. This revolutionary design was intentional. It allowed scholars to walk among the books, to see the entire collection at a glance, and to engage with the texts as active participants in a conversation with the past. Natural light flooded in from large windows, symbolizing the Enlightenment ideal of illumination through learning, a striking contrast to the often secretive nature of knowledge in that era. This brings us to the library's most profound and controversial paradox: its role as a sanctuary for forbidden knowledge. Despite Philip II's fervent support for the Spanish Inquisition, his library at El Escorial became a protected vault for the very texts the Inquisition sought to suppress. The collection grew to include over 40,000 printed books and 4,000 manuscripts in Latin, Greek, Arabic, and Hebrew. Among these were works deemed heretical, such as writings by Protestant reformers like Martin Luther and John Calvin, which were strictly banned in Spain. There were mystical texts exploring Kabbalah and Christian mysticism that flirted with unorthodox ideas. There were scientific treatises that challenged the Aristotelian worldview sanctioned by the Church, including early works on astronomy that would later support a heliocentric model of the solar system. Philip's compulsion to collect everything, even ideas he personally opposed, created a unique intellectual sanctuary. These dangerous books were not destroyed. They were locked away, available for study by a select few trusted scholars and inquisitors who needed to understand the enemy in order to better combat it. The library became, in effect, the intelligence agency of the Counter-Reformation. This necessity to manage such a vast and contentious collection led to a groundbreaking innovation, a revolutionary system of library organization. The head librarian, Benito Arias Montano, a renowned biblical scholar and philologist, devised a meticulous classification scheme that was centuries ahead of its time. Books were not simply arranged by size or date of acquisition, as was common. Instead, they were organized by subject matter. Theology, philosophy, law, medicine, science, and the arts each had their designated sections. Furthermore, Montano created a sophisticated cataloging system, producing detailed indexes that allowed researchers to locate specific information across thousands of volumes. This systematic approach transformed the library from a mere storage facility into a functional research institution. It established core principles of information science that would eventually form the foundation of modern librarianship, demonstrating how the challenge of managing controversial knowledge can spur incredible advances in how we organize and access information itself. The survival of this priceless collection through the centuries has been precarious. marked by a devastating fire in 1671 that destroyed a significant portion of the original manuscripts, including many unique texts that were lost to history forever. Yet, the library endured, continually adding to its collections and preserving its unique character. The story of the Escorial Library is ultimately a story about the complex and often uncomfortable relationship between power and knowledge. It forces us to confront a difficult question: can an institution dedicated to controlling thought also, perhaps unintentionally, become a means of preserving it? King Philip II sought to weaponize knowledge for religious orthodoxy, but in doing so, he inadvertently built a fortress that protected the very diversity of ideas he fought against. The library stands as a permanent monument to this contradiction, a reminder that the human drive to collect and understand is often more powerful than the desire to suppress and censor. Nestled in the stark, majestic desert landscape at the foot of the biblical Mount Sinai, the monastery of St. Catherine feels less like a building and more like a part of the mountain itself. Founded in the year 550 AD by the Byzantine Emperor Justinian, this remote fortress of faith was built to protect the monks who had lived as hermits in the area since the 4th century. Its immense, ancient walls, constructed from the very granite of the mountain, were designed to withstand attacks from desert raiders, but these formidable defenses ended up serving a far greater, unintended purpose. They created an almost perfect time capsule, safeguarding an uninterrupted continuum of knowledge and devotion for over 14 centuries. Within these walls, the library of St. Catherine's Monastery has not merely survived. It has quietly accumulated the spiritual and intellectual treasures of multiple civilizations, becoming one of the most significant and unexpected crossroads of scholarship on Earth. The sheer isolation of St. Catherine's is the primary reason for its miraculous preservation. Located far from the political and religious power centers of Rome, Constantinople, and later the capitals of Europe, the monastery was often overlooked during the great upheavals that destroyed other libraries. It escaped the systematic destruction of pagan and early Christian sites that marked various Roman imperial decrees. It was bypassed by the waves of conquest that swept through the region. Most famously and central to its unique story is its relationship with the Islamic world. According to a cherished tradition, the Prophet Muhammad himself granted his protection to the monastery. A document housed in the library, known as the Ottiname, is a firman purportedly signed by Muhammad in the 7th century, guaranteeing the monks protection, freedom of worship, and exemption from military service and taxes. Whether the document is original or a later confirmation, the spirit of its promise was largely honored by successive Muslim rulers, from the caliphs to the Ottoman sultans. This formal protection ensured that the monastery and its library remained untouched, a respected island of Christianity in an expanding Islamic sea. The heart of the library's unparalleled collection is, without question, the manuscripts. It holds the world's second largest collection of ancient codices and scrolls, surpassed only by the Vatican Library. But what sets St. Catherine's apart is the breathtaking antiquity and stunning variety of its texts. Its crown jewel is the Codex Sinaiticus, a Greek manuscript of the Bible dating from the mid-4th century. This is one of the 2 oldest complete Christian Bibles in existence, a priceless witness to the early formation of the biblical canon. The story of its discovery in the 19th century by the German scholar Konstantin von Tischendorf is itself a tale of scholarly adventure, involving a chance sighting of pages in a basket of scraps destined for the fire. Beyond this famous codex, the shelves are lined with over 3,000 other manuscripts in an astonishing array of languages. There are liturgical texts in Greek, theological treatises in Arabic, historical chronicles in Syriac, and poetic works in Georgian. This linguistic diversity is not an accident. It is a direct record of the diverse pilgrims and scholars who traveled to this holy site over more than 1,000 years, often leaving behind books in their native tongues as acts of devotion. This brings us to the library's most fascinating role, that of an intellectual crossroads. The monastery was never an isolated outpost staring suspiciously at the outside world. Instead, it became a vibrant center for translation and dialogue. During the early Islamic period, the monks, who were fluent in both Greek and Arabic, engaged in profound intellectual exchange. They began translating philosophical and scientific works, not just religious texts, creating Arabic versions of Aristotle and other Greek thinkers. These translations would later be crucial for the Islamic Golden Age, where scholars in Baghdad and elsewhere would use them as a foundation for their own advancements. In this way, the lonely monastery in the Sinai desert acted as a critical way station for knowledge, helping to pass the torch of classical learning from the Greek-speaking world to the Arabic-speaking world, and ultimately back to a Europe emerging from the Dark Ages. The library's treasures extend far beyond bound pages. It also safeguards what is known as the Sinai palimpsest, a manuscript that reveals a hidden layer of history literally scraped away. In the days when parchment was scarce, scribes would often reuse sheets by scraping or washing off the original text and writing over it. These underlying, erased texts are called palimpsests. Using advanced multispectral imaging technology, researchers have been able to digitally recover these lost words from several manuscripts in St. Catherine's collection. The results have been revolutionary. They have revealed previously unknown poems in ancient Caucasian Albanian, a language that is otherwise extinct. They have uncovered medical texts and early Christian writings that were thought to be lost forever. Each scanned page is like an archaeological dig, uncovering a hidden stratum of literary history that no one knew was there, proving that the library still holds secrets waiting to be revealed. Perhaps the most visually striking aspect of the collection is its icons. Due to its remote location, St. Catherine's was untouched by the iconoclastic controversies that convulsed the Byzantine Empire in the 8th and 9th centuries, when religious images were systematically destroyed. As a result, the monastery possesses the world's oldest and most complete collection of early Byzantine icons, some dating back to the 6th century. These are not later copies, they are the original works, preserving a unique artistic and spiritual tradition. Alongside these images are countless liturgical objects, vestments, and documents that detail the daily rhythm of monastic life across 17 centuries. The library, therefore, is not just a collection of ideas but a repository of lived faith, preserving the tangible objects of worship that accompanied the written word. The survival of St. Catherine's is a powerful testament to the possibility of coexistence. It stands as a monument not to conquest, but to a long, sustained tradition of mutual respect and protection across the great Abrahamic faiths. In a region often scarred by religious conflict, this monastery and its library offer a different narrative, one of dialogue, curiosity, and a shared reverence for knowledge and the divine. It is a place where a Greek Orthodox manuscript of the Gospels, an Islamic firman of protection, and a Jewish philosophical text translated into Arabic could sit on the same shelf, not as rivals, but as silent witnesses to the complex, intertwined history of human seeking. While the remote monastery of St. Catherine's preserved knowledge through divine protection and isolation, another library, deeply embedded in the heart of imperial power, faced a far more turbulent fate. In the very center of Beijing, adjacent to the Forbidden City's imposing walls, stood the Hanlin Academy, the absolute pinnacle of Chinese scholarly achievement for over a millennium. This was not merely a library in the conventional sense. It was the brain trust of the Chinese Empire, an institution where the nation's most brilliant minds were tasked with a sacred duty to collect, organize, and protect the entire universe of knowledge that defined Chinese civilization. To be a Hanlin scholar was to reach the zenith of intellectual and social prestige, earned through a grueling series of imperial examinations that tested decades of memorization and literary skill. These elite academics were the emperor's closest advisors, the authors of the dynasty's official history, and the guardians of its most sensitive state secrets. The Academy's library was the vault for all of this, a repository that held the very ideological and administrative blueprint for governing the world's largest and most sophisticated bureaucracy. The Academy's origins date back to the 8th century during the Tang dynasty, but its golden age arrived with the Ming. It was under the ambitious Yongle emperor in the early 15th century that the Hanlin Academy undertook its most monumental project, the creation of the Yongle Dadian, or the Yongle Encyclopedia. The scale of this endeavor is almost incomprehensible. Emperor Yongle commissioned a team of over 2,000 scholars to read every single book in the imperial collection, an estimated 7,000 to 8,000 texts covering history, philosophy, the arts, sciences, medicine, and religion. Their task was to summarize and compile every piece of significant knowledge into a single, definitive reference work. The result was a staggering 11,095 volumes, hand-copied in elegant calligraphy, containing over 370 million characters. This was not an original work, but a massive condensation of existing literature, designed to preserve China's entire literary heritage against the threat of loss. It was, without doubt, the largest encyclopedia in the pre-modern world, a physical embodiment of the emperor's power and the Academy's scholarly might. This immense treasure, however, was its own greatest enemy. The original manuscript was simply too valuable and too large to ever risk moving or copying in its entirety. It remained housed within the walls of the Hanlin Academy and the Forbidden City, a legendary but largely inaccessible monument to knowledge. Over the centuries, the encyclopedia faced a slow, agonizing decline. The original Ming manuscript was lost, likely destroyed in a fire, and a single security copy was made during the 16th century. But this copy, too, began to vanish piece by piece. Volumes were pilfered by corrupt officials, damaged in fires, or simply decayed from neglect. By the 19th century, the once mighty encyclopedia had been reduced to a fraction of its original glory, a silent witness to the fading power of the Qing dynasty and the institution that guarded it. The Hanlin Academy's intimate connection to state power is precisely what made it and its collections a primary target during periods of violent upheaval. It was the symbolic heart of the old Confucian order, and for those seeking to overthrow that order, its destruction was a necessary act. The most catastrophic blow came in the summer of 1900 during the Boxer Rebellion. As an anti-foreigner and anti-Christian movement gripped northern China, the Boxers laid siege to the foreign legations in Beijing. The Hanlin Academy, located directly next to the British legation, became a strategic battleground. Some accounts suggest Chinese imperial troops intentionally set fire to the Academy's library to smoke out foreign soldiers who were using its complex layout for cover. Other reports indicate the fire was started by Boxer shells or was simply a tragic consequence of the intense fighting. Regardless of the exact spark, the result was apocalyptic. The flames raged for days, consuming an incalculable portion of the Academy's priceless collections. Precious Sung and Ming Dynasty editions, unique manuscripts, and the remaining volumes of the Yongle Encyclopedia were fed to the inferno. The heat was so intense that it melted the metal clasps on the ancient book covers. scholars of the time described the sky blackened by ash, the physical remains of 2,000 years of scholarship floating over Beijing. What survives today from this colossal loss are haunting fragments, scattered across the globe like pieces of a shattered vase. After the Boxer Rebellion, the surviving volumes of the Yongle Encyclopedia, which had been moved for safekeeping, were not returned to a secure archive. Instead, they were subject to decades of further theft and neglect. Librarians and academy officials, their salaries often unpaid by a collapsing imperial government, reportedly sold volumes off piecemeal to survive. By the 1930s, only around 60 volumes remained in China. The rest had found their way into museums and private collections worldwide. Today, just over 400 volumes are confirmed to exist, a mere 4% of the original colossal work. These survivors are among the most treasured items in institutions like the Library of Congress in the United States and the British Library in London. Each volume is a heartbreaking glimpse of what was lost, a single brick from a library that was meant to be an impregnable fortress for all knowledge. The story of the Hanlin Academy is a sobering reminder that proximity to power offers no guarantee of safety. In times of revolution, it can make a library the first casualty. Its fate stands in stark contrast to the survival of remote repositories like St. Catherine's, proving that sometimes the safest place to hide a treasure is not at the center of the world, but far away from it. While the Hanlin Academy in Beijing was consumed by the flames of rebellion, a different kind of intellectual fire was being carefully tended across the world in the heart of Paris. On the left bank of the Seine, in a district that would become synonymous with academic life, the Sorbonne Library began its life not as a grand imperial project, but as a humble collection for impoverished theology students. Its origins are rooted in the charitable vision of Robert de Sorbonne, a chaplain and confessor to King Louis IX, who founded a college in 1257 to provide accommodation and education for bright students who lacked the wealth to pay for it. The library was the soul of this college, a vital tool for the rigorous study of theology that would, within a century, grow to become the most prestigious center of learning in all of Europe, its name eventually synonymous with the entire University of Paris. The intellectual atmosphere the Sorbonne fostered was electric, making it a magnet for the greatest minds of the age. It was here that the revolutionary scholastic method took hold, a way of learning that sought to reconcile faith with reason, to use logical argument and philosophical inquiry to understand divine truth. The library's collections were the fuel for this intellectual engine. Scholars like Thomas Aquinas, Albertus Magnus, and Bonaventure would have spent countless hours in its reading rooms, surrounded by manuscripts, engaging in spirited debates known as disputations. They were cross-referencing the works of ancient Greek philosophers like Aristotle, recently rediscovered through Arabic translations, with the teachings of the Church Fathers like Augustine. The library didn't just house these texts, it facilitated a dialogue across centuries, allowing medieval thinkers to build upon ancient foundations and ultimately reshape Western thought. The very structure of the university lecture and the academic degree, which spread from Paris across Europe, was born from this environment of structured, text-based debate and study. The growth of the library's collection is a story of remarkable generosity and the rising status of the written word. Unlike imperial libraries built through conquest or royal decree, the Sorbonne's treasures were largely amassed through donations from the scholars who used it. Professors, upon their death, would often bequeath their entire personal libraries to the institution, seeing it as a form of immortality for their work. This practice created an incredibly diverse and deep collection, reflecting the specific research interests of generations of academics. kings too recognized the library's importance. Philip IV, known as Philip the Fair, and other French monarchs donated beautifully illuminated manuscripts and precious texts, not only to support learning but also to gain favor with the powerful and often independent-minded university. These volumes were objects of immense value, bound in leather and wood, their pages illuminated with gold leaf and intricate illustrations that made them works of art as well as repositories of knowledge. This central role inevitably placed the Sorbonne Library at the crossroads of the era's most intense religious and political storms. As a bastion of theological orthodoxy, it was a key player in the condemnation of heretical ideas. The library's texts were used to define doctrine and to provide the evidence for trials. Yet, it also found itself caught between the competing powers of the Pope, the French king, and the university's own fiercely independent faculty. During the Great Schism of the 14th century, when rival popes claimed authority from Rome and Avignon, the Sorbonne was pressured to take sides, and its library became an arsenal of propaganda for different factions. Navigating these conflicts required a delicate balance, asserting the university's right to self-governance and academic freedom, while avoiding direct confrontation that could lead to its dissolution or the seizure of its precious collections. A pivotal moment in the library's history, and for the history of knowledge itself, was its early embrace of the printing press. While many monastic libraries viewed the new technology with suspicion, seeing hand-copied manuscripts as superior, the Sorbonne recognized its revolutionary potential for the rapid dissemination of ideas. By 1470, just decades after Gutenberg's invention, the first printing press in France was established right next to the Sorbonne. This placed the library at the very epicenter of the information revolution of its day. Scholars could now produce multiple identical copies of texts for wider distribution, and the library itself began to systematically acquire these early printed books, known as incunabula, alongside its manuscripts. This forward-thinking adoption of technology ensured that the Sorbonne would not become a relic but would instead help usher in the Renaissance, facilitating the spread of humanist ideas that were beginning to flow north from Italy. The physical journey of the library's collection is a map of its survival against the odds. It faced numerous threats, from the devastating fires that regularly swept through medieval cities to the targeted attacks during periods of political unrest, such as the French Wars of Religion in the 16th century. Each time, portions of the collection were lost, but each time they were painstakingly rebuilt. The library was moved, reorganized, and expanded multiple times over the centuries, its contents shifting within the growing maze of university buildings. This constant evolution reflects the enduring commitment to its core mission, to serve as the foundational resource for critical inquiry. The Sorbonne Library's greatest legacy is not merely its age or its specific collections, but its model. It demonstrated that a library could be the dynamic, beating heart of a university, a place not for silent storage, but for active, contentious, and world-changing scholarship. It proved that knowledge, when made accessible to a community of dedicated learners, could become a force capable of navigating the tumults of history and lighting the way forward. While the Sorbonne Library was navigating the theological and political upheavals of medieval Europe, another institution, shrouded in even greater secrecy, was quietly amassing an archive that would chart the course of Western history from the very heart of Christendom. Nestled within the walls of Vatican City, the Vatican Apostolic Archive stands as one of the most mythologized and misunderstood repositories on Earth. It is crucial to distinguish it from the Vatican Library, which is a separate collection of published books and manuscripts. The archive is something else entirely. It is the central filing cabinet of the papacy itself, a vast and labyrinthine collection of the Catholic Church's internal administrative records, diplomatic correspondence, and state secrets stretching back over 1,200 years. For centuries, its contents were guarded with intense secrecy, accessible only to a handful of trusted Vatican officials. It wasn't until the groundbreaking decision of Pope Leo XIII in 1881 that the archive finally began to open its doors to qualified outside scholars, ending an era of isolation and offering the world its first real glimpse into the meticulous record-keeping of one of history's most enduring institutions. The sheer chronological depth of the collection is almost beyond comprehension. Its oldest documents date back to the 8th century, but the records become exponentially more detailed from the year 1198 onward, creating an unbroken paper trail of papal governance. To walk its 85 kilometers of shelving is to traverse the entire landscape of Western history through its original source material. The archive holds the actual parchment and paper handled by popes, kings, emperors, and saints. Here, history is not interpreted through the lens of a historian's narrative. It is encountered in its raw, unvarnished form in the hurried script of a papal secretary, the elegant calligraphy of a royal petition, or the broken seal on a treaty that redrew the map of Europe. This is not a library of ideas, but a warehouse of actions and decisions, where every document represents a moment when the Church interacted with the world. Among its countless treasures are documents that have fundamentally altered our understanding of pivotal historical events and figures. The archive holds the original court transcripts from the trial of the Knights Templar in the early 14th century, a case built on accusations of heresy and blasphemy that was likely motivated more by the French king's desire to seize the wealthy order's assets than by any genuine religious outrage. These detailed records, which include the often coerced confessions of the knights, provide a chilling window into the use of judicial power for political and financial gain. In a completely different vein, researchers have found personal letters that humanize iconic figures of the Renaissance, such as a petition from the great artist Michelangelo. He writes not about divine inspiration, but about a more earthly concern: his unpaid wages for work on the Sistine Chapel. In a beautifully penned letter, he complains to a Vatican official about going months without payment, pleading that the delay was causing him great distress. This mundane document forever changes our perception of the artist, transforming him from an untouchable genius into a working man struggling to get paid by his powerful and often slow-moving employer. Perhaps the most famous set of documents relates to the English Reformation. The archive preserves the original supplication from King Henry VIII of England, appealing to Pope Clement VII for an annulment of his marriage to Catherine of Aragon. This was not a simple request. It was an elaborately argued legal petition, supported by dozens of supporting documents, all intended to persuade the Pope to grant the king his freedom to marry Anne Boleyn. The subsequent correspondence between Rome and England charts the agonizingly slow and politically fraught deliberation that ultimately ended in the Pope's refusal. This single decision, preserved in these files, would set in motion England's break with Rome, the dissolution of the monasteries, and the creation of the Church of England, altering the religious and political destiny of a nation and a continent. To read these letters is to witness that fateful moment of decision in real time. The archive's role extends far beyond European courts and into the era of global exploration and colonization. It contains detailed reports from papal nuncios and missionaries sent to the New World, Africa, and Asia. These documents offer complex and often contradictory accounts of the encounters between European colonizers and indigenous peoples. They include descriptions of new cultures, maps of uncharted territories, and, critically, debates within the church itself about the ethics of colonization and the treatment of native populations. Some missionaries courageously defended the rights and humanity of the people they were sent to convert, sending back blistering critiques of the brutality they witnessed. These records provide an invaluable and often overlooked perspective on the age of conquest, showing that the historical narrative was never monolithic, even within the institutions that supported it. The very act of opening the archives has itself been a gradual and carefully managed process. Popes have periodically authorized the release of documents from specific historical periods, with the most recent major opening occurring in 2020, when Pope Francis made available the files from the pontificate of Pius XII, which covered the tumultuous years of the Second World War and the Holocaust. Scholars around the world are still sifting through this massive collection of over 200,000 files, seeking to understand the full complexity of the Vatican's actions and diplomacy during one of history's darkest chapters. The revelations that emerge from this ongoing work are rarely simple, often painting a picture of a deeply cautious institution navigating an impossible moral landscape, balancing humanitarian efforts to save lives with a fear of political retaliation and a desire to maintain neutrality. The archive does not simply provide easy answers, it offers the complex, messy, and deeply human raw materials from which history is painstakingly built, one document at a time. While the Vatican archives were meticulously preserving the administrative records of the Church, a different kind of revolution was being bankrolled not by popes, but by bankers in the flourishing city of Florence. The Medici family, who rose to immense wealth and power through their financial acumen, possessed a currency far more valuable than gold: knowledge. Their private libraries were not just status symbols for a wealthy dynasty, they were the very engine rooms of the Italian Renaissance, actively fueling a cultural rebirth by rediscovering, preserving, and disseminating the classical texts that had been lost to Europe for nearly 1,000 years. This was a deliberate project of cultural revival, and it began with the family's patriarch Cosimo de' Medici, whose vision extended far beyond the ledgers of his banking empire. Cosimo understood that true legacy was not measured in florins alone, but in cultural and intellectual capital. A voracious collector himself, he personally financed expeditions to scour the monasteries of Europe for forgotten manuscripts. His agents traveled as far as the dying embers of the Byzantine Empire, bringing back precious Greek texts that had been preserved in the East while they decayed in the West. But Cosimo's most revolutionary act was not in acquiring these books, it was in deciding to share them. In 1444, he founded the Bibliotheca Marciana, though it is better known today as the Medici Library. Housed in the Dominican convent of San Marco, this was a seismic shift in the concept of knowledge itself. It was the first public library since the fall of the Roman Empire. For the first time in a millennium, a collection of books was not locked away in a royal vault or a monastic scriptorium for the exclusive use of a privileged few. It was open to the public, to any scholar or curious citizen with a thirst for learning. This single act democratized access to knowledge and made Florence the undisputed intellectual capital of Europe, a magnet for thinkers, artists, and innovators. The project was supercharged by Cosimo's grandson, Lorenzo de' Medici, known to history as Lorenzo the Magnificent. If Cosimo built the library, Lorenzo populated it with genius. He was not merely a patron, he was a passionate scholar and poet in his own right, and he used the family's vast resources to create an intellectual ecosystem. He established a vibrant workshop, a literal scriptorium within the palace where he employed a small army of the finest scribes, translators, and book hunters. Their mission was explicit: to copy, translate, and annotate the flood of classical works now arriving in Florence. Most importantly, Lorenzo became the primary patron of the philosopher Marsilio Ficino, tasking him with nothing less than the translation of the entire corpus of Plato's works from Greek into Latin. This was a monumental undertaking. Ficino didn't just translate the words, he absorbed the philosophy, founding the Platonic Academy in Cergy, a villa provided by Lorenzo, where Europe's greatest minds gathered to debate these newly rediscovered ideas. This revival of Platonic thought, with its emphasis on the pursuit of beauty, truth, and the dignity of humanity, provided the philosophical bedrock for the entire Renaissance, shifting the focus from the medieval preoccupation with the divine to a new celebration of human potential. The contents of the Medici collections were a revelation to a Europe that had been starved of its own classical heritage. Beyond the philosophical works of Plato and Aristotle, the libraries held the original poetic works of Homer and Hesiod, the dramatic plays of Sophocles and Aeschylus, and the historical writings of Herodotus and Thucydides. But the Medicis were also fervent supporters of contemporary vernacular literature, ensuring the preservation and promotion of works by the great Florentine poets Dante Alighieri and Francesco Petrarch. By placing these modern Italian texts alongside the ancient Greek and Latin classics, the Medicis made a powerful statement that the culture of their own time was part of a great continuum, a rebirth worthy of standing shoulder to shoulder with the giants of antiquity. This fusion of the ancient and the modern created a powerful cultural confidence that infused every aspect of Renaissance art and thought. The physical beauty of the books themselves was a testament to this new human-centered spirit. The Medici scribes and the artists they commissioned elevated book-making to a high art. Manuscripts were transcribed in elegant humanist scripts, a clear and readable font that broke from the cramped Gothic script of the Middle Ages, mirroring the new clarity of thought. They were illuminated with breathtaking miniatures by artists like Sandro Botticelli, who painted mythological scenes inspired by the very texts they adorned. These books were not merely containers for information, they were luxurious objects of desire, works of art that celebrated the harmony of intellectual and aesthetic beauty. Owning and creating such objects became a defining feature of Renaissance patronage, a tangible expression of the era's ideals. The influence of these libraries radiated outward from Florence like shockwaves, fundamentally reshaping European culture. Scholars from across the continent flocked to the city to access the Medici collections, and they carried copies of these rediscovered texts back to their homelands. The renewed interest in classical Greek, fueled by the Medici-sponsored translations, led to a more critical study of all ancient texts, including the Bible, planting the early seeds of Christian humanism that would later influence the Reformation. The Neoplatonic ideas nurtured in Lorenzo's Garden Academy infused the art of the period, evident in Botticelli's poetic paintings like The Birth of Venus and Primavera, which drew directly on the classical myths being debated and translated within the Medici circle. The library's very model, a privately funded, publicly accessible collection dedicated to the revival of learning, became the blueprint for great libraries across Europe, proving that the preservation of knowledge was not just the duty of the church or the state, but a civic responsibility that could be undertaken by enlightened individuals. The Medici family, through their deliberate and lavish investment in books, did not just witness the Renaissance, they consciously architected it, building a new world with the recovered wisdom of the old. Yet even as the Medici libraries were fueling a rebirth of classical humanism in Western Europe, a new power in the East was looking to those very same models to declare its own arrival on the world stage. In the windswept marshlands of the Neva River Delta, a city was being built from scratch as a grand statement of imperial ambition. This was St. Petersburg, the window to the west forged by Peter the Great. But it was his formidable successor, Catherine the Great, who understood that a true European capital required more than grand boulevards and Baroque palaces. It needed a mind. Her instrument for this was the Imperial Public Library, an institution conceived not just to collect books, but to fundamentally transform Russian society and project its enlightened power to the world. Catherine's vision for the library was deeply personal and politically astute. A voracious reader and prolific correspondent with the leading philosophers of the French Enlightenment, she saw herself as an enlightened monarch, a philosopher queen on the throne. Founding the library in 1795 was a deliberate act to position Russia as the cultural and intellectual equal of Paris, London, and Berlin. Her method of acquisition was as ambitious as her goal. She didn't just buy individual books, she acquired entire libraries. In a series of stunning coups, she purchased the personal collections of two titans of the Enlightenment, Voltaire and Denis Diderot. The acquisition of Voltaire's library was particularly symbolic. Here were the very books, often filled with the philosopher's own marginal notes challenging authority and dogma, now owned by an absolute monarch. It was a powerful, if paradoxical, statement. Russia would embrace the most radical ideas of the age, but it would do so under the controlled, custodial eye of the state. This was enlightenment from the top down, a carefully managed importation of Western thought. But the library's mission was not solely about looking westward. Its most profound and enduring role was to gaze inward, to collect, preserve, and define the very essence of Russian identity. This is where its collection of Slavic manuscripts became its soul. Its crown jewel, acquired just a few years after its founding, is the Ostromir Gospel. Created in 1056, this is the oldest dated East Slavic book in existence. Its pages, written in a majestic uncial script, represent a sacred milestone. The moment the written word, recently imported from Byzantium, took root and flourished in the soil of Kievan Rus. To hold the Ostromir Gospel was to hold the birth certificate of Russian literature and orthodoxy. Alongside it, the library gathered ancient chronicles like the Primary Chronicle, which wove the origin story of the Slavic people, and the first laws codified by Yaroslav the Wise. These were not mere historical artifacts. They were the foundational texts that the library was now tasked with protecting and presenting as the bedrock of a national narrative. This dual identity, as a beacon of modern European thought and a vault of ancient Slavic tradition, placed the library at the very center of a deep and enduring tension within Russian society. For the westernizing elite who frequented its reading rooms, the library was a gateway. It offered access to the revolutionary ideas of the Enlightenment, to the latest scientific discoveries from Paris, and to the political theories that were stirring unrest across Europe. It became a crucial meeting ground for the intelligentsia, the class of thinkers and writers who would later debate Russia's path between Slavophilism and Westernization. Yet, for the conservative state and the Orthodox Church, the library was also a bulwark. By centralizing these ancient manuscripts, the state could control their interpretation, using them to promote a narrative of unique national destiny and divine right autocracy that was utterly at odds with the Enlightenment ideals sitting on the opposite shelf. The library literally housed this intellectual civil war within its walls. The 20th century subjected this great institution to its most severe tests, transforming it from an imperial symbol into a fortress of preservation. The Bolshevik Revolution of 1917 could have meant its utter destruction as a relic of the hated Tsarist regime. Instead, the new Soviet government, despite its ideology, recognized its immense value. It was renamed the M.E. Saltykov-Shchedrin State Public Library and was charged with a new, paradoxical mission to safeguard the very cultural heritage of the empire it had overthrown. During the horrific 900-day siege of Leningrad in World War II, the library's darkest hour became its finest. As the city starved and froze under Nazi bombardment, the librarians became unsung heroes. They devised a meticulous plan to protect the collections, evacuating the most priceless items like the Ostromir Gospel to secret locations deep in the interior. Those who remained risked their lives daily, not for food or fuel, but for books. They patrolled the cavernous halls, putting out incendiary bombs that pierced the roof, and they guarded the empty shelves against looters, knowing that the preservation of these texts was a defiance of the annihilation facing their city. Their devotion ensured that the physical memory of Russia would survive even if the city itself fell. Today, as the National Library of Russia, it continues to navigate this complex legacy. It stands as a monument to Catherine's Enlightenment dream, a world-class research institution with millions of items. Yet, it remains the guardian of those unique Slavic manuscripts that root Russian culture in its distinct historical and spiritual path. The tension between those two roles, between the impulse to open out to the world and the imperative to turn inward to tradition, is not a relic of the past. It is the very story of modern Russia, and it is a story that has been written, preserved, and debated within the library's walls for over 2 centuries. It is more than a collection of books. It is the physical embodiment of a nation's ongoing conversation with itself about who it is and who it wants to become. Imagine the sheer scale of the loss. In the aftermath of the Spanish conquest of Mexico, a systematic campaign was waged not just against a people, but against their memory. In town squares and temple courtyards, bonfires fueled by thousands of Aztec books, known as codices, lit the sky. To the Spanish friars and soldiers, these were instruments of pagan devil worship, and their destruction was a holy duty. They believed they were erasing a false history to make way for a true one. In this fervor, they nearly succeeded in extinguishing the intellectual and cultural heartbeat of an entire civilization. It is one of history's most devastating acts of biblioclasm, the deliberate destruction of books, and it means that our understanding of the Aztec world is filtered through a handful of precious survivors, each one a fragment of a much larger, vanished library. These weren't books as Europeans understood them. Aztec codices were long, continuous strips of amate paper made from the beaten bark of fig trees, or sometimes deerskin, that were folded like an accordion between 2 protective wooden covers. They communicated not through a written alphabet, but through a complex and beautiful system of pictographs and ideograms, a sophisticated visual language. A single image could represent a place, a god, a day in the ritual calendar, or an entire concept. Trained scribes known as tlacuilos, meaning those who write painting, were the guardians of this knowledge. They were not mere copyists. They were highly educated scholars, often priests or nobles, who underwent years of rigorous training to master the artistic conventions, symbolic colors, and historical narratives required to create and interpret these documents. Their work was a sacred act, a way of preserving the collective memory of their people. So where were these libraries housed? The most important collections were kept in the Comicac, schools for the nobility and priestly class attached to major temples. Here, the codices served as textbooks for teaching religion, astronomy, history, law, and the complex ritual calendar that governed every aspect of Aztec life. Other codices were held in palaces for administrative use, records of tributes paid by conquered cities, maps of landholdings, and genealogies of the ruling class. This wasn't a single, vast building like the Library of Alexandria, but a distributed network of specialized knowledge centers, each serving a vital function in maintaining the spiritual, political, and economic order of the empire. To enter one of these rooms was to walk into the operational mind of a thriving, sophisticated civilization. The few codices that escaped the flames did so through a twist of fate, often by being sent across the ocean as curiosities for the Spanish court. The most famous of these is the Florentine Codex. This monumental work is not a pre-Hispanic original, but something perhaps even more valuable, a post-conquest project of cultural salvage. It was compiled over decades by the Franciscan friar Bernardino de Sahagun, who had the extraordinary foresight to collaborate with Nahua elders and former Tlacuilos. Working together, they created a 12-volume encyclopedia of Aztec life, written in both Nahuatl and Spanish. It is an astonishingly detailed and often sympathetic record, covering everything from the attributes of gods and the rituals of kings to the names of insects and the speeches midwives gave to newborn children. It is our most comprehensive window into that lost world, a bridge built by the very people witnessing the dissolution of their culture. Another crucial survivor is the Codex Mendoza, created around 1541 on the orders of the first Viceroy of New Spain, who wanted to explain this new territory to Emperor Charles V. Nahua artists, using their traditional pictorial style, filled its pages with the history of Aztec rulers, a list of conquered towns, and a fascinatingly detailed inventory of the empire's annual tribute, from bags of cocoa beans and bundles of quetzal feathers to jaguar skins and warrior costumes. It is a bureaucratic document that vibrantly illustrates the economic engine of the empire, showing us the exact price of conquest and the incredible material wealth that flowed into the capital city of Tenochtitlan. The tragic fate of the Aztec libraries forces us to confront a difficult truth about history. It is often written by the victors with the ink of the vanquished. The systematic burning of the codices was an attempt to control the narrative, to sever a people from their past and make them more malleable to a new future. The survival of even a few texts is a powerful act of defiance against that erasure. They remind us that knowledge is not neutral, it is power, and the destruction of knowledge is a tool of domination. These surviving codices are more than historical records. They are embers saved from a great fire, and from them, scholars and the descendants of the Aztecs themselves continue to piece together a richer, more authentic understanding of a civilization that refused to be entirely silenced. Their story is a permanent warning of how fragile our shared human heritage can be, and a testament to the resilience of memory itself. But to truly grasp the impact of Al-Karawayin, we must move beyond its role as a passive preserver and see it for what it truly was, a dynamic, humming engine of innovation. Within its serene courtyards and sunlit study rooms, scholars weren't just copying old texts. They were actively pushing the boundaries of human understanding in mathematics, astronomy, and medicine, creating new knowledge that would ripple across continents and centuries. The library's manuscripts are filled with breathtaking evidence of this intellectual ferment. There are intricate, hand-drawn diagrams of complex surgical instruments, scalpels, forceps, and bone saws, whose designs show a sophisticated understanding of human anatomy and a commitment to advancing medical practice. These weren't theoretical sketches, they were blueprints for tools used in some of the world's earliest hospitals, which were often attached to centers of learning like Qarawiyyin. The astronomical charts found within the collection are equally staggering. Medieval scholars, peering at the night sky from the rooftops of Fez, produced incredibly precise star maps and celestial models. They built upon and corrected the work of Ptolemy, calculated the Earth's circumference with remarkable accuracy, and developed astrolabes and other observational instruments of stunning complexity. These weren't just for navigation or timekeeping. They were attempts to fundamentally understand humanity's place in the cosmos, a pursuit that knew no religious or cultural boundaries. This spirit of inquiry extended into the realm of philosophy, where the library's texts document fierce and nuanced debates that tried to reconcile faith with reason, divine revelation with logical inquiry. The works of philosophers like Ibn Rushd, known in the West as Averroes, argued passionately that Greek rationalism and Islamic theology were not enemies but partners in the search for truth. His detailed commentaries on Aristotle, which were studied, debated, and eventually translated within these very walls, would later become foundational texts for European scholastics like Thomas Aquinas, directly helping to ignite the European Renaissance. It's a profound thought. The intellectual rebirth of the West was, in part, kindled by arguments that had already been thoroughly hashed out in a library in Morocco. For many years, however, this monumental legacy was physically fading. The library, like many ancient institutions, suffered from centuries of wear, and its precious collections were increasingly vulnerable to the passage of time. This is what makes its recent restoration so emotionally powerful. In a beautiful full-circle moment, the architect chosen to lead the meticulous restoration project was a woman, Aziza Kayani, echoing the library's founding by Fatima al-Fihri over 1,000 years prior. The project was a masterclass in marrying old and new. Traditional Moroccan craftsmanship was used to restore the exquisite carved cedar wood, intricate stucco, and brilliant zellige tilework, while hidden beneath the ancient floors, a state-of-the-art drainage system was installed to protect against humidity. Most importantly, a new underground vault was constructed, equipped with the latest climate control technology to ensure the fragile manuscripts would survive for another millennium. This wasn't just a renovation, it was a profound act of cultural reclamation, a declaration that this heritage was not only worth saving, but was central to a modern, forward-looking identity. And the treasures within these newly stabilized vaults are now revealing their secrets to the world through an ambitious digitization project. As fragile pages are carefully scanned, scholars are making thrilling modern discoveries. Recently digitized manuscripts have revealed previously unknown marginalia, notes and corrections scribbled in the margins by students and scholars centuries ago, giving us a real-time window into the vibrant debates that once filled the study halls. Advanced imaging is also uncovering intricate diagrams and complex mathematical equations that had faded to near invisibility, allowing researchers to fully appreciate the technical genius of medieval Islamic science. Perhaps the most significant finds are the personal letters and administrative documents occasionally bound into the larger texts, which offer glimpses of daily life. The concerns of a student, the cost of materials, the network of scholars across the Islamic world. These digitized collections are democratizing access, allowing a global community of historians, scientists, and curious minds to explore this legacy from anywhere in the world, ensuring that the library's role as a beacon of knowledge continues, no longer confined by its ancient walls but amplified through the digital ether. As the fate of Constantinople was sealed in 1453, a wave of scholars, artists, and philosophers fled the crumbling Byzantine capital, carrying with them the most precious cargo imaginable, not gold or jewels but books. Many of these intellectual refugees found safe harbor in the only place that made sense: the serene, powerful, and fiercely independent Republic of Venice. This was not merely a coincidence of geography. It was a meeting of minds. Venice, with its vast mercantile empire and pragmatic governance, understood the value of knowledge just as it understood the value of spices and silk. The most precious treasures these Byzantine immigrants brought were their personal libraries, filled with original Greek manuscripts of authors like Aristophanes, Hesiod, and Sophocles' texts that had been largely lost to the Latin West for centuries. The Venetian state, recognizing an opportunity of incalculable worth, began to actively solicit these collections, offering citizenship and patronage in exchange. This deliberate act of cultural rescue laid the foundational stones for what would become one of the Renaissance's most magnificent libraries, the Bibliotheca Marciana, or the Library of St. Mark. The library's very architecture was a declaration of Venetian ambition. The Republic commissioned the renowned sculptor and architect Jacopo Sansovino to design a building worthy of this new repository of knowledge. His creation, the Libreria Sansoviniana, was a masterpiece of high Renaissance design, a long, elegant structure facing the Doge's Palace across the Piazzetta. With its grand arched windows, intricate loggias, and rows of statues depicting classical philosophers and scholars, the building itself was a symbolic bridge. It physically connected the seat of secular power, the Doge's Palace, with the spiritual heart of the city, St. Mark's Basilica, positioning knowledge as the vital link between church and state. The interior was even more breathtaking, a soaring hall vaulted with gold leaf ceilings painted by titans like Titian and Veronese, depicting allegories of wisdom and knowledge. This was not a quiet, cloistered monastery library. It was a public monument to learning, designed to awe its visitors and proclaim Venice's status not just as an empire of trade, but as an empire of the mind. Of course, Venice's unique identity as the Serenissima Republica, the most serene republic, was fundamentally built on its mastery of the sea. This maritime destiny was reflected directly in the library's most practical and sought-after collections, its navigational charts and portolan maps. The Marciana became the central archive for the state's top-secret map Pia Mundi, the detailed charts used by its legendary captains. These were not decorative objects, they were instruments of immense economic and military power, meticulously updated by a secretive state-sponsored guild of cartographers. The maps were drawn on vellum with stunning accuracy, depicting coastlines, ports, currents, and prevailing winds across the Mediterranean, and, as the age of discovery dawned, far into the Atlantic and along the West African coast. They included annotations in Venetian dialect about local rulers, trading conditions, and potential hazards. Possessing the most accurate chart could mean the difference between a voyage that returned laden with pepper and one that ended on a reef. The library's role in safeguarding this geographic intelligence was a direct extension of the Venetian arsenal, the state shipyard. One built the vessels, while the other provided the knowledge to sail them to profit and power. This connection to commerce also shaped the library's acquisitions in the vibrant new world of printing. Venice quickly became the publishing capital of Europe, home to pioneering printers like Aldus Manutius. The Marciana developed a special relationship with these presses. By law, printers were required to deposit a copy of every book they published in Venice into the library's collections. This created an incredible and ever-growing repository of contemporary thought, from cheap pamphlets and popular poetry to lavish, illustrated editions of the classics. The library's shelves began to hold not only the ancient Greek manuscripts brought by refugees, but also the crisp, newly printed Latin and Italian translations of those same works, now available to a much wider audience. This made the Marciana a living record of the intellectual and literary output of the entire Republic, a snapshot of what Venetians were actually reading, debating, and thinking about throughout the 16th and 17th centuries. Beyond maps and books, the library's collections echoed with the sounds of the city itself. Venice was a center of musical innovation, home to composers like Adrian Willert and later Claudio Monteverdi. who developed the rich polyphonic style that defined the late Renaissance. The Marciana became the archive for this sonic revolution, collecting original music scores and manuscripts from the great composers who worked at St. Mark's Basilica. These were not merely sheets of notes, they were complex, beautifully rendered artworks often dedicated to the Doge himself. Alongside these, the library preserved the state's vast historical archives, the official chronicles of diplomatic missions, the logs of galley captains, and the minutes of council meetings. This combination of music and statecraft creates a uniquely Venetian portrait, a republic that governed its empire with the same meticulous attention to detail that its composers used to craft a mass or a madrigal, both seen as essential arts for a serene and prosperous state. The Biblioteca Marciana stands today as the ultimate expression of Venetian identity, a place where the practical knowledge of a merchant and the lofty ideals of a scholar were understood to be two sides of the same golden coin. While Venice was meticulously charting the known world from its lagoon, another institution, born from an even grander imperial vision, sought to map the entire universe of human thought. The House of Wisdom in Baghdad, or Beit al-Hikmah, was far more than a library filled with scrolls. It was a revolutionary idea given physical form. Established in the early 9th century during the golden age of the Abbasid Caliphate, it functioned as a powerhouse of intellectual synthesis, part academy, part research institute, and part massive translation bureau. Its core mission was breathtakingly ambitious: to seek out all the world's knowledge regardless of its origin, translate it into Arabic, and then critically examine, debate, and build upon it. This was not a passive repository but a dynamic engine of innovation, and its model of open, interdisciplinary inquiry remains stunningly modern. The driving force behind this endeavor was a series of enlightened caliphs, most notably Al-Ma'mun, who ruled from 813 to 833. He didn't just fund the House of Wisdom, he was its chief enthusiast, personally engaging with scholars and actively directing the acquisition of manuscripts. His agents were sent on missions across the known world with blank checks, tasked with purchasing or copying rare texts from the Byzantine Empire, Persia, India, and even China. Caravans arriving in Baghdad brought not only silks and spices but also priceless mathematical treatises, medical manuals, and philosophical works. This systematic, state-sponsored effort to centralize global knowledge was unprecedented. It was fueled by a powerful belief that truth was not the exclusive property of any one culture or faith, but a universal treasure to be discovered and harnessed for the betterment of society. The first and most crucial step was translation. The House of Wisdom became a buzzing hive of linguistic activity, where teams of Christian, Jewish, Muslim, and Zoroastrian scholars worked side by side. A typical process might involve a Christian translator rendering a Greek text into Syriac, his native language, and then a Muslim scholar translating that Syriac into Arabic. This collaborative, multi-stage process ensured both accuracy and nuance. Under the leadership of brilliant figures like Hunayn ibn Ishaq, this was not mere word-for-word transcription. It was an act of scholarly interpretation and cultural transfer. They standardized a new vocabulary of scientific Arabic, creating a precise language of learning that could express the most complex ideas from geometry, astronomy, and medicine. Through their work, the entire corpus of Greek, learning the works of Plato, Aristotle, Euclid, Galen, and Ptolemy, was saved from oblivion in Europe's dark ages and given a new life in Arabic. But the real genius of the House of Wisdom was what happened after translation. Scholars didn't just preserve these texts, they subjected them to rigorous questioning and experimentation. They would gather in seminars and debates, pitting Aristotle's ideas against those of Indian mathematicians or Persian astronomers. This culture of critical inquiry and healthy skepticism was the institution's true innovation. It created an environment where simply accepting the word of an ancient authority was not enough. Ideas had to be proven, tested, and improved upon. This interdisciplinary friction is where groundbreaking discoveries were born. Consider the monumental contributions of Muhammad al-Khwarizmi, a scholar whose very name gives us the word algorithm. Working at the House of Wisdom, he encountered the Indian numerical system, which included the revolutionary concept of zero. He synthesized this with Greek mathematical knowledge to write his foundational text, the compendious book on calculation by completion and balancing. The Arabic word for completion, al-jabr, gives us the word algebra. But his book was more than just a new branch of mathematics. It introduced the decimal positional system to the Islamic world and later to Europe, revolutionizing commerce, science, and engineering. He wasn't just a preserver, he was a unifier and an innovator. In medicine, the Persian scholar Al-Razi, known in the West as Rhazes, directed a major hospital in Baghdad and wrote over 200 books. His most famous work, a vast medical encyclopedia called the Comprehensive Book of Medicine, was a systematic compilation of knowledge from Greek, Syrian, Persian, and Indian sources, combined with his own acute clinical observations. He was the first to clearly distinguish between smallpox and measles, and he championed the use of evidence-based reasoning and ethical treatment for patients. His work, translated into Latin, became a standard medical textbook in European universities for centuries. The tragic end of this flourishing world is a story etched in history's darkest ink. In 1258, the Mongol armies of Hulagu Khan laid siege to Baghdad. When the city fell, the Tigris River was said to have run black with the ink of the countless books flung from the House of Wisdom's libraries and red with the blood of the slain. The destruction was so complete that the exact location of the academy was lost to history. The physical center was obliterated, its scholars killed or scattered. Yet, the House of Wisdom's legacy proved impossible to extinguish. Its true product was not the books themselves, but the copies of those books and the ideas they contained, which had already been disseminated across the Islamic world from Cordoba to Cairo and beyond. Centuries later, these same Arabic texts, many of them containing the original Greek works alongside the groundbreaking commentaries of Islamic scholars, were translated into Latin in places like Toledo, Spain. They flowed into a Europe that was reawakening, providing the very foundation for the scientific revolution and the Renaissance. The works of Al-Khwarizmi, Al-Razi, and Ibn al-Haytham didn't just preserve knowledge, they passed the torch, ensuring that the light of reason, fueled by a truly global and interdisciplinary conversation, would continue to shine. Imagine the profound shock of a Spanish friar in the 16th century, holding a Maya codex for the very first time. To his European eyes, accustomed to pages of alphabetic text, this would have been utterly bewildering. It wasn't a book as he knew it, but a long, continuous strip of bark paper, coated with a fine layer of white lime plaster, and folded back and forth like a delicate accordion. Its pages were not filled with rows of letters, but with a vibrant, intricate tapestry of painted images, gods with serpent headdresses, jaguars prowling through celestial bands, and columns of dots and bars that looked like some strange numerical cipher. This was not a primitive sketchbook. It was the pinnacle of Mesoamerican intellectual achievement, a sophisticated fusion of art, science, and sacred scripture. And to the Spanish missionaries, its very existence was a direct threat to their holy mission. These codices were the heart of Maya civilization, the closest equivalent to the great libraries of the Old World, but they were not housed in a single building. Instead, they were maintained in the sacred spaces of temples and the schools for the elite, the Comacak, where they were in the care of the Aj-Tizib, the priest scribes. These men were not mere clerks, they were the revered scholars and astronomers of their society, undergoing decades of training to master the complex logosyllabic writing system. A single glyph could represent an entire word or a syllable, and they were combined in fluid, artistic ways to record everything from the deeds of kings to the precise movements of Venus. The creation of a codex was a sacred act, and the scribes themselves were considered to be under the patronage of the maize god, their fingers imbued with divine inspiration to paint the history of the world and the heavens. The content of these libraries was vast and covered the entire spectrum of knowledge necessary to sustain a sophisticated civilization. Their most famous achievement was the development of incredibly precise calendrical systems. The Maya calculated a solar year that was even more accurate than the Julian calendar used in Europe at the time of contact. They meticulously tracked the cycles of the moon and the predictable movements of planets, especially Venus, which they associated with war and used to time military campaigns. The Dresden Codex, one of the four survivors, contains pages and pages of these calculations, including remarkably accurate tables for predicting solar eclipses. To achieve this, they employed a sophisticated mathematical system that included the concept of zero, a revolutionary abstract idea that wouldn't appear in Europe for centuries. Their numbers, a combination of dots and bars, allowed them to perform complex equations and record dates over vast spans of time, conceptualizing history in millions of years, a scale that is still staggering to contemplate today. Yet, for all their intellectual brilliance, these libraries were incredibly vulnerable. The bark paper, while durable in the humid rainforest climate, was no match for the deliberate fire of ideological conquest. The Spanish campaign against the Maya codices was one of the most devastating acts of cultural annihilation in human history. Led by zealous clerics like Bishop Diego de Landa, who infamously wrote that they found a great number of books and burned them all because they contained nothing but superstition and lies of the devil, countless thousands of these texts were systematically gathered and set ablaze in public autos da fe. In a single tragic act in Mani, Yucatan in 1562, de Landa destroyed every codex he could find, erasing in an afternoon the accumulated knowledge of generations. This holocaust of paper and ink was intended to sever the Maya people from their past, their religion, and their intellectual heritage, making them more pliable subjects for crown and cross. The survival of the four known codices, the Dresden, Madrid, Paris, and Grolier, is a story of sheer, improbable chance. They are survivors not of the Maya homeland, but of the transatlantic voyage to Europe. They likely reached the continent as exotic curiosities, sent back by conquistadors or friars as examples of the strange and idolatrous things found in the New World. For centuries, they sat unread in royal and private libraries across Europe, their meanings utterly lost. The Paris Codex was rediscovered in a basket of old papers in the Bibliothèque Nationale in France. The Dresden Codex was found in a private collection in Vienna. Their true significance wasn't recognized until much later, and the long, painstaking work of decipherment only began in earnest in the 20th century, a puzzle that required the collaboration of linguists, archaeologists, and modern Maya speakers. The secrets these four survivors have begun to whisper are revolutionizing our understanding of the ancient Maya. We now know their writing system was fully capable of expressing any concept, from the deeply poetic to the mundanely administrative. The Dresden Codex, for instance, is not just an astronomical almanac, it is a ritual guide. Its eclipse tables were likely used not just for prediction, but for intervention to perform ceremonies to avert the perceived catastrophe of the sun or moon being swallowed by the dark. The Madrid Codex seems focused more on astrology and everyday rituals for activities like hunting and beekeeping, connecting the celestial cycles directly to the practicalities of life on the ground. The more recently authenticated Grolier Codex appears to be entirely focused on the complex movements of Venus, further cementing the Mayas' reputation as the preeminent astronomers of the ancient Americas. Every cracked glyph unlocks another piece of the story, revealing a people with a profound connection to time, not as a linear progression, but as a sacred, cyclical force where history and prophecy were intertwined. The loss of the great Maya libraries is an eternal tragedy, a void in human history that can never be filled. But the fierce, decades-long effort to decipher the few remaining pages is a testament to the enduring power of knowledge itself. It is an act of reclaiming a voice that was meant to be silenced forever, proving that even 4 fragile books, rescued from the ashes of an auto-da-fe, can hold enough wisdom to force us to completely rewrite our understanding of an entire civilization. While the libraries of Europe were emerging from the cloisters into public spaces, and those of the Islamic world were preserving the flame of ancient science, the Mughal Empire in India was cultivating a different kind of treasure house, one where knowledge was inseparable from breathtaking beauty. The imperial libraries of the Mughal emperors were not merely repositories of information. They were the ultimate expressions of imperial power, cultural sophistication, and a deeply held philosophy of universal tolerance. Established in the grand capitals of Agra, Fatehpur Sikri, and later Shahjahanabad in Delhi, these libraries were the vibrant, intellectual hearts of an empire that saw itself as the cultural successor to both the Persianate world and the ancient Indian subcontinent. To enter one was to step into a world where the written word was elevated to a supreme art form, a deliberate fusion of the finest creative traditions from across the known world. The most magnificent productions of these library workshops were the imperial memoirs and chronicles, which served a dual purpose as both historical record and powerful propaganda. The Baburnama, the autobiography of the empire's founder, Babur, is a stunning example. Written in Chagatai Turkic, his native tongue, it is a remarkably personal and vivid account of his life, filled with keen observations on everything from military strategy and the politics of conquest to the taste of mangoes and the beauty of Indian flowers. Under his grandson Akbar, this project was expanded into a monumental enterprise. The Akbarnama, or Book of Akbar, was commissioned to be the definitive history of his reign. Overseen by his court historian, Abul Fazl, and illustrated by a team of over 100 artists from across the empire, it became one of the most lavishly produced manuscripts in history. These were not books meant to be tucked away on a shelf. They were immersive experiences. The paintings were not simple illustrations but narrative masterpieces that operated on multiple levels, conveying political allegory, spiritual depth, and sheer aesthetic pleasure simultaneously. They were designed to be pored over in court, their images read and discussed as intently as their text, solidifying the emperor's image as a divinely guided, universal sovereign. This artistic achievement was only possible because of Akbar's revolutionary approach to his library's central creative hub, the Imperial Kitabkhana, or manuscript workshop. This was far more than a simple scriptorium. It was a structured, state-sponsored atelier that functioned like a modern creative agency. Akbar actively recruited the finest talent from the Persian Safavid courts, local Indian Hindu artists from the Rajput kingdoms, and even Muslim artists from the Deccan, deliberately creating a multicultural team. These artists were not forced to conform to a single, rigid style. Instead, they were encouraged to collaborate, to learn from one another, and to blend their distinct traditions. A single page might feature the precise, delicate linework of a Persian master, the vibrant, earthy palette and dynamic composition of an Indian artist, and the masterful calligraphy of a Central Asian scribe. This intentional cross-pollination gave birth to a wholly new and distinctive Mughal aesthetic, one that was at once realistic and idealized, opulent and deeply spiritual. The library was not just a place that housed art, it was the very engine that created it, a living laboratory of cultural synthesis. Beyond the famed chronicles, the Mughal libraries housed a staggering diversity of knowledge that reflected the emperor's wide-ranging, inquisitive minds. Scientific manuscripts were highly prized, particularly works on astronomy and medicine. They collected and translated Sanskrit texts on mathematics and Hindu astrology, pairing them with Islamic star charts and Persian treatises on medicine. The library would have held elaborate zaj or astronomical tables used for timekeeping, navigation, and casting horoscopes, which were essential for the timing of important state events. Medical texts, often beautifully illustrated with detailed diagrams of plants and the human body, blended Ayurvedic knowledge from India with Unani Tib Greco-Arabic medicine, creating a sophisticated, integrated approach to healing. This wasn't just academic, it was practical. The emperors employed court physicians from diverse backgrounds: Hindus, Muslims, Europeans, and the library provided the shared knowledge base for their work, directly impacting the health of the imperial household and the elite. Perhaps the most telling reflection of the Mughal multicultural ethos was the library's linguistic diversity. While Persian was the language of administration and high culture, the collections were profoundly polyglot. Shelves held volumes in Arabic for theology and law, Sanskrit for philosophy and science, Turkic for poetry and history, and even regional Indian languages. Akbar, who was likely dyslexic but possessed a brilliant, inquisitive mind, had a passion for translation. He established a translation bureau within the library, tasked with rendering the great epics of the Indian tradition into Persian. The Hindu classics, the Mahabharata, which became the Razmnama or Book of War, and the Ramayana, were translated and lavishly illustrated, making these foundational Indian stories accessible to the Persian-speaking court elite. This was a profound act of cultural respect and integration. It sent a clear message: the wisdom of India was not something to be conquered and suppressed, but a vital part of the empire's intellectual and spiritual inheritance to be celebrated, preserved, and made their own. The Mughal library, therefore, became the ultimate symbol of their governing philosophy, a diverse, multi-ethnic empire united under a single sovereign who derived his legitimacy from his ability to harmonize and celebrate all its magnificent parts. High in the rugged mountains of northern Ethiopia, in monasteries carved from solid rock or perched on sheer cliff faces accessible only by rope, time moves to a different rhythm. Here, in a land that was one of the first to embrace Christianity, ancient traditions of faith and learning have been guarded with a fierce and uninterrupted devotion for over 1.5 millennia. The libraries of the Ethiopian Orthodox Church are not grand, public buildings but sacred, often secretive, sanctuaries. Their treasures are not housed on open shelves but within the Holy of Holies, the maktas of rock-hewn churches, or locked in stout wooden chests, the keys held by a single trusted monk. This is a living library tradition where the act of preservation is itself a form of worship, and where each fragile manuscript is considered a tangible vessel of divine wisdom, connecting the present directly to the apostolic past. The physical object at the heart of this tradition is the codex, and its creation is a sacred craft that has changed little over the centuries. The pages are made of parchment, meticulously prepared from the skins of goats or sheep, scraped thin and treated until they achieve a smooth, durable surface. The ink is not mere pigment, it is alchemy. Scribes concocted it from soot, crushed minerals, and even the fermented juices of specific plants, mixed with gum arabic to create a vibrant palette of deep blacks, fiery reds from crushed volcanic rock, and brilliant blues and greens from precious imported minerals. The binding is an art form in itself. Thick wooden boards, often covered in tooled leather that is stamped with intricate cross patterns and sometimes adorned with embossed copper or silver. Many are further protected by heavy fabric wrappers, and some of the most precious are kept in leather pouches with long straps, allowing a priest to wear the sacred text close to his body, a physical embodiment of carrying the word of God. Within these elaborate bindings lies a literary universe written in Ge'ez, an ancient Semitic language that, like Latin in the West, ceased to be a spoken vernacular and became the sacred, liturgical language of the Ethiopian Church. This linguistic fossilization acted as a perfect preservative, locking the texts in a stable form for over 1,000 years. The most famous of these is the Kebra Nagast, or the Glory of the Kings. This 14th century national epic is far more than a historical chronicle. It is the foundational myth of the Ethiopian Solomonic dynasty and a testament to the country's deep connection to the Old Testament. It tells the captivating story of the Queen of Sheba's journey to Jerusalem to meet King Solomon, their union, and the birth of their son, Menelik I, who, according to the legend, later brought the Ark of the Covenant back to Ethiopia. This narrative established Ethiopia's identity as a new Zion, a chosen people with a divine covenant, and its manuscript copies are among the most revered and beautifully illuminated in the entire collection. But to focus only on the Kebra Nagast is to see only one star in a vast galaxy. The libraries are filled with illuminated gospels of breathtaking beauty, where the portraits of the evangelists are rendered with a distinctive Ethiopian style, large, expressive eyes conveying deep spiritual intensity. There are countless Senkasar or Synaxaria, which are books of saints' lives read on specific days of the year, preserving the stories of both universal Christian saints and uniquely Ethiopian holy men and women. There are theological works clarifying the Church's distinct Miaphysite Christology, which holds that Christ's divinity and humanity are united in one single nature, a doctrine that set them apart from both Rome and Constantinople and fueled a rich, independent theological tradition. Beyond the explicitly religious, these manuscripts reveal a sophisticated and holistic intellectual world. Medical texts known as Ord provide a fascinating window into traditional healing practices. They contain recipes for treatments using local herbs, spells to ward off illness-causing spirits, and detailed diagrams of the human body, representing a seamless blend of practical knowledge, faith, and ancient magic. Historical chronicles, like those detailing the reign of the 17th century Emperor Susannios, offer first-hand accounts of political intrigue, warfare, and the complex relationship with visiting Jesuit missionaries from Europe. And then there are the magical scrolls, long, narrow strips of parchment covered in intricate drawings and prayers, designed to be worn as talismans for protection against specific ailments or misfortunes, demonstrating a vibrant and personal aspect of faith that operated alongside formal church doctrine. The greatest tragedy and the most thrilling opportunity of these libraries is that the vast majority of their contents remain a sealed book to the outside world. It is estimated that there are over 200,000 manuscripts scattered across tens of thousands of churches and monasteries, and perhaps 90% of them have never been studied, catalogued, or translated by modern scholars. They exist in a kind of parallel intellectual universe, known only to the priests and monks who guard them. This is not out of malice, but out of a profound sense of sacred duty. These are not considered historical documents for academic study, but living, breathing articles of faith. Access is a privilege granted slowly, built on years of trust and respect. Furthermore, the very isolation that protected them for centuries now poses a threat, as these institutions often lack the resources to properly conserve their treasures against the ravages of time, insects, and a harsh climate. This immense, unexplored archive has the potential to radically reshape our understanding of African intellectual history. For too long, the narrative of deep, historical scholarship in Africa has been overlooked in favor of a focus on oral traditions. The Ethiopian manuscript tradition shatters that assumption. It presents us with an unbroken, written intellectual lineage that is entirely African in its origin and development, yet also deeply engaged with the wider Jewish, Christian, and Islamic worlds. These texts can tell us how African theologians interpreted scripture independently from European influences. They can reveal the inner workings of a powerful and enduring African empire. They contain unique astronomical observations, medical knowledge, and philosophical debates that developed outside the well-trodden paths of Western thought. Each untranslated manuscript is a message in a bottle from a past we are only just beginning to appreciate, waiting to tell its part of the story of a continent whose written history is far richer, deeper, and more complex than we have ever known. Imagine a sacred protocol, a commandment of preservation so deeply ingrained that it shaped the very survival of a people's written heritage. This was the power of the Jewish law of Shemos, which forbade the destruction of any text containing the name of God. But what do you do with a document that is too worn for use, yet too holy to discard? For centuries, Jewish communities around the world found a profound solution. They did not burn them or bury them. They stored them. They gathered these retired texts in a special repository called a geniza, a word that simply means storage or hiding place, and there, the papers would rest, often for centuries, accumulating layer upon layer of a community's entire written life. This practice of sacred hoarding, born from religious obligation, became one of history's most extraordinary acts of unintentional preservation, creating accidental time capsules that would eventually tell the story of the Jewish diaspora in its own words. The most spectacular example of this is the Cairo Geniza, discovered in the 19th century in the attic of the ancient Ben Ezra synagogue in Fustat, Old Cairo. This was not a curated library of great works. It was a chaotic, magnificent jumble of everything. For nearly 1,000 years, the Jewish community of Cairo placed their retired papers into this geniza. The dry Egyptian climate acted as a perfect preservative, and when scholars finally broke through a sealed door, they found not a few shelves of books, but a room filled floor to ceiling with an estimated 300,000 fragments. This was not a collection of only scripture. It was the entire paper trail of a Mediterranean community. There were, of course, pages from prayer books and biblical scrolls, but nestled among them were personal letters filled with gossip and business deals, shopping lists detailing the price of lentils, marriage contracts, divorce deeds, magical amulets, children's homework, and even practice pages where a young student had clumsily drawn the Hebrew alphabet. It was the ultimate historical record, one that preserved the voices of women, the poor, and the merchant-class people almost always left out of the official historical record. Within this paper mountain were treasures that reshaped our understanding of Jewish intellectual history. Scholars found autographed letters and legal rulings by Moses Maimonides, the great 12th century philosopher and physician who actually lived and worked in Cairo. Reading his personal correspondence offers a stunningly human glimpse of the man behind the legend. In one letter, he complains bitterly about the constant stream of visitors interrupting his work, and in another, he offers medical advice to a distant patient. The Geniza also preserved a lost world of medieval poetry, including the works of Judah Halevy, whose beautiful and mournful verses yearned for Zion. These documents did not just tell us what people thought. They showed us how they lived, loved, argued, and did business across the Mediterranean, from Spain to India, revealing a connected, sophisticated Jewish world that was far more complex and integrated than anyone had previously imagined. But the story of Jewish libraries extends far beyond the Attic in Cairo. In the 16th century, the small Galilean hilltop town of Safed became a sudden and unlikely world center of Jewish mysticism. After the expulsion of Jews from Spain in 1492, many of the most brilliant rabbis and thinkers found refuge in Safed. They established yeshivas and study houses, and with them libraries. These were not genizas of discarded texts, but active, working collections focused on the new, revolutionary teachings of Kabbalah, the Jewish mystical tradition. The most famous of these mystics, Isaac Luria, taught a complex cosmology that saw the entire universe as a process of divine brokenness and repair. His students and the students of his students meticulously copied and disseminated his ideas. The libraries of Safed became the publishing houses for this spiritual revolution, producing the texts that would eventually influence Jewish thought across the entire diaspora, ensuring that a mystical flame kindled in a remote Turkish town would light up Jewish communities from Poland to Morocco. Meanwhile, in the bustling, cosmopolitan Republic of Venice, a different kind of Jewish library was taking shape, one born from the printing press and the spirit of the Renaissance. Venice was a major center of early Hebrew printing, with pioneering Christian printers like Daniel Bommerg working closely with Jewish scholars to produce the first printed editions of the Babylonian Talmud and the complete Mikrayot Gedolot, the Rabbinic Bible. This created an explosion of available texts. Jewish families, particularly wealthy merchants, began assembling significant private libraries that reflected the new humanist spirit of the age. They collected not only religious texts but also works of science, medicine, philosophy, and secular poetry. These libraries demonstrated a confident, urban Jewish identity that was engaged with the wider intellectual currents of Europe. They were a testament to adaptation, showing how a people could maintain their distinct religious and legal traditions while actively participating in the cultural renaissance happening right outside their ghetto walls. The true miracle of these dispersed libraries is their story of resilience through mobility. A Jewish library was never a permanent fixture in a single building. It was a portable homeland. When a wave of persecution or an expulsion decree would inevitably arrive, the most precious items were not left behind. They were packed into chests and carried into exile. A family's library was its most valuable asset, a tangible link to a past home and a foundation for a future one. This constant movement led to a fascinating cross-pollination of ideas. A legal text copied in Spain might bear marginal notes from a scholar in Germany and then later be studied by a student in Italy. The libraries were living, traveling entities, and they ensured that the intellectual heritage of the diaspora remained unified despite the vast geographical distances that separated its communities. They were the ultimate adaptation to a life of uncertainty, proving that culture is not rooted in a place but carried in the mind and preserved on the page, ready to be unpacked and rebuilt wherever the next journey ends. High in the Andes Mountains, the Inca Empire built the largest and most sophisticated civilization in the Americas without a system of writing as we know it. They had no alphabet, no paper, and no clay tablets. Yet, they governed a vast territory stretching from modern-day Colombia to Chile with astonishing precision. managing a complex economy, a massive workforce, and a detailed historical record. Their secret, a technology of memory and information so unique that it has baffled scholars for centuries, the quipu. These were not simple ropes, they were intricate devices of knotted strings that functioned as a three-dimensional, tactile language, and the places where they were stored were the Inca equivalent of libraries, holding the entire operational knowledge of a continent-spanning empire. A quipu, at first glance, appears deceptively simple. It consists of a main, horizontal cord from which multiple pendant cords hang down like a fringe. But upon closer inspection, the complexity reveals itself. Each element of the quipu was a variable in a sophisticated code. The cords were made from cotton or the hair of llamas or alpacas, and their colors held specific meanings: yellow for gold, crimson for the Inca himself, green for the forests, and so on. The type of knot represented a numerical value, a figure 8 knot for ones, a long knot with multiple turns for tens, and so on, using a decimal place system. The position of the knot on the cord indicated its order of magnitude, but this is where the mystery deepens. While the numerical function of quipus for accounting tracking tributes, census data, and warehouse inventories is well understood, a growing body of evidence suggests they were capable of so much more. Recent research posits that the very structure of the quipu, the spin and ply of the cords, their directionality, and their spatial relationship to each other could encode narrative information, stories, genealogies, and even poetry. This means the quipu may have been a complete writing system, just one that operates in a medium utterly foreign to our own ink and paper tradition. These extraordinary objects were not kept by just anyone. They were the tools of a highly trained and powerful professional class, the quipukamayaks, or the keepers of the quipus. These men were the administrative engine of the empire, trained from youth in the complex art of creating and, most importantly, reading the quipus. They would travel throughout the empire, collecting data on everything from the number of llamas born in a village to the amount of maize stored in a state warehouse. They would then return to administrative centers like the capital Cusco and store their quipus in rooms that functioned as the empire's central filing system. These repositories, often located in temples or government buildings, were the Inca libraries. To walk into one would have been an awe-inspiring experience. Walls lined with hundreds, perhaps thousands, of these colorful knotted cords, each one a volume containing the vital statistics of a distant province or the sacred history of a royal lineage. The quipukamayak could read them aloud, translating the knots and colors into a detailed report for the Sapa Inca and his governors. The greatest challenge historians face in decoding the quipu is a catastrophic historical rupture, the Spanish conquest. The conquistadors, upon encountering quipus, largely dismissed them as pagan trinkets or primitive tallying devices. More devastatingly, the Catholic Church, in its campaign to extirpate idolatry, systematically sought out and destroyed thousands of quipus, believing them to be instruments of devil worship. This cultural genocide was nearly total. It severed the living chain of knowledge, effectively killing the language of the knots. Today, only about 600 Inca quipus are known to survive in museums and private collections around the world. We are left with the physical objects but have lost the oral tradition that gave them their full meaning. It is as if we have recovered a library of books but forgotten how to read the alphabet they are written in. The task of the modern researcher, therefore, is akin to cryptographic code breaking without a Rosetta Stone. There is no known bilingual text, no quipu with a Spanish translation attached. Scholars are attempting to crack the code using a multi-pronged approach. Some, like anthropologist Sabine Hyland, are conducting ethnographic work in remote Andean villages. searching for communities that might have preserved a folk memory of the knot-making traditions. Others are using advanced technologies like 3D scanning to analyze the physical properties of surviving quippers in minute detail, creating digital models that can be compared against each other to search for recurring patterns that might represent syntax or grammar. They are looking for what they call narrative quippers, ones that don't follow the predictable numerical patterns of an accounting record, but have a more complex, perhaps even unique, structure that could indicate they were used for storytelling. Every potential breakthrough is a hard-won victory. The discovery that the direction of the chords twist, whether it was spun clockwise or counterclockwise, might signify a positive or negative value, or even a concept like above or below, was a major leap. The realization that the knots could represent not just quantities but also the subjects being counted, a specific type of knot for potato, another for warrior, opens the door to a logographic system. Each small revelation is a piece of the puzzle, but the full picture remains elusive. The true meaning of the quipu is locked away, a testament to a way of seeing and recording the world that was literally tied to the landscape, the animals, and the very fingers of its creators. Decoding it would not just be an academic exercise, it would be an act of historical justice, allowing us to finally hear the history of the Inca Empire, not through the filter of their Spanish conquerors, but in their own unique and eloquent voice. While the Inca recorded their history in knots and the great libraries of Europe amassed volumes of printed text, an entirely different philosophy of knowledge was being cultivated in the islands of Japan. Here, the concept of a library was deeply intertwined with spiritual pursuit and martial discipline, creating collections that were not just repositories of information, but training grounds for the soul. In places like the Kanazawa Bunko, established in the 13th century by the ruling Hojo clan, and within the silent scriptoriums of Zen temples, the written word was treated with a reverence that bordered on the sacred. These were not general collections for public use. They were highly curated arsenals of wisdom, designed to forge the ideal individual, the Bunbu Ryodo warrior scholar, a person who mastered both the literary and martial arts in equal measure. The contents of these libraries reveal this dual purpose with striking clarity. Shelves were filled with classical Chinese texts like Sun Tzu's The Art of War and the Confucian Analects, which were studied not for abstract theory but for immediate, practical application. A samurai would pore over strategies for maneuvering troops, but he would also internalize Confucian principles of loyalty, righteousness, and benevolent leadership to govern the lands under his control. Alongside these were Buddhist sutras, particularly those of the Zen school, which offered a mental and spiritual toolkit for the warrior. Texts on poetry and the delicate art of the tea ceremony were not seen as frivolous distractions. They were essential training in mindfulness, aesthetics, and self-control. The act of copying a sutra or composing a short poem before battle was a form of mental calibration, a way to quiet the mind and achieve the clarity and focus necessary for life or death decisions. The library was the gymnasium where this mental and spiritual strength was built. This cultivation of the inner self was the very essence of Bushido, the way of the warrior, and these libraries were its primary conduits. Bushido was not a single codified text but an evolving ethical system, a blend of Shinto purity, Zen mindfulness, and Confucian duty. Its principles were transmitted through a vast body of literature that filled these collections. Family libraries maintained by generations of samurai would contain heirloom copies of house codes or kakon, which laid out the ethical precepts and rules of conduct for the clan. They also held biographies of legendary loyal warriors and tactical manuals that emphasized honor as much as victory. A young samurai's education was steeped in these texts, teaching him that his sword was less important than his character, and that true strength was demonstrated through mercy, honesty, and unwavering loyalty to his lord. The library was the silent sensei, the teacher that instilled the code that would govern his entire life. The influence of Zen Buddhism on this culture cannot be overstated, and temple libraries were the beating heart of this philosophical exchange. Zen's emphasis on direct, intuitive experience and rigorous discipline resonated deeply with the samurai mindset. Monasteries like those in Kamakura and Kyoto became major centers of learning, where samurai would often retire or spend periods of contemplation. Their libraries held the essential texts of Zen, the recorded sayings of Chinese masters, koan collections designed to break the logical mind and provoke enlightenment, and manuals on meditation. Studying these works taught a warrior to act without hesitation from a place of calm awareness, a state known as mushin, or no mind. This was not a trance-like state, but one of hyper-awareness, free from the paralyzing clouds of fear, anger, or doubt. In the heat of battle, this mental training was as crucial as physical skill, allowing a samurai to respond to a threat with the immediacy of a reflection in a mirror. The quiet reading rooms of these temple libraries were, paradoxically, where warriors trained for their most violent moments. The impact of this learned warrior class on Japanese governance and culture was profound and enduring. Because the ruling shoguns and regional daimyos were themselves products of this scholarly tradition, they governed as philosopher generals. They sponsored the arts, built schools, and established libraries, understanding that cultural legitimacy was as important as military power. The famed Tokugawa shogunate, which brought centuries of stability, actively promoted Confucian scholarship to create an orderly, hierarchical society. The meticulous record-keeping and administrative precision required to govern were skills honed through the same disciplined study applied to martial strategy. This created a bureaucratic class drawn from the samurai that was both literate and deeply ethical, at least in theory, guided by the principles they had absorbed from the books in their clan libraries. Perhaps the most beautiful legacy of this tradition is how it softened the harshness of the warrior's life with a deep appreciation for beauty and tranquility. The samurai ideal was not a brutish soldier, but a cultured individual who could compose a poignant poem one moment and face death with equanimity the next. This is perfectly captured in the practice of writing jaisai, or death poems. Many samurai, drawing on a lifetime of literary and spiritual study, would brush a final, graceful poem moments before falling in battle or committing ritual suicide. These poems often reflected on the transience of life, the beauty of nature, or a final, enlightened thought, transforming a violent end into an act of profound artistic expression. In that final gesture, we see the ultimate fruit of the samurai library, a mind so thoroughly cultivated by the wisdom of the ages that it could meet its end not with a scream, but with a verse, demonstrating a mastery over the self that was the true, highest form of victory. While the samurai of Japan were contemplating poetry and strategy in their tranquil libraries, another empire, far older and just as formidable, was building repositories of knowledge that would serve as the administrative and intellectual backbone of the ancient world. The Persian Empire, under the visionary leadership of rulers like Cyrus the Great and Darius, understood that governing a vast, multicultural realm stretching from the Indus Valley to the Nile required more than just armies and roads. It demanded a sophisticated system of information management. At the heart of this system were the imperial archives, libraries that functioned as the central processing units for the entire state, ensuring that the decrees of the king in Persepolis could be implemented in the farthest satrapies with precision and consistency. The most tangible evidence of this bureaucratic genius comes from the ruins of Persepolis itself. While the grand audience halls and ornate stairways speak of imperial power, it was the discovery of the Persepolis fortification archive that truly revealed the empire's inner workings. This was not a library of literary masterpieces, but something arguably more valuable: tens of thousands of clay tablets and seals, written in Elamite, Akkadian, and Old Persian cuneiform, that detailed the day-to-day administration of the empire around 500 BC. These tablets are the raw data of statecraft. They record the meticulous issuance of rations to workers, the payment of taxes in kind, everything from sheep and wine to grain, and the complex logistics of feeding the vast court and its army as they moved across the realm. This archive was the ultimate tool of control, allowing the central government to monitor its economy, prevent corruption among local officials, and project power through meticulous accounting rather than constant force. It proves that the Persian Empire's greatest innovation may have been its bureaucracy, and its library was that bureaucracy's beating heart. Beyond these dry administrative records, the Persians were also preservers of their own rich spiritual and literary heritage. The core of their religious belief was encapsulated in the sacred texts of Zoroastrianism, a faith that emphasized the cosmic struggle between good and evil, and would later influence Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. The primary text, the Avesta, was a collection of hymns, rituals, and laws attributed to the prophet Zarathustra. For centuries, these teachings were transmitted orally by priests, a living library of memory. However, during the Sasanian Empire, centuries after the fall of Persepolis, there was a concerted effort to commit the entire Avesta to writing. This was a monumental project of preservation, creating a definitive written canon to protect the religion's core teachings from alteration or loss. These texts were written in a special script developed for the purpose, and they were likely housed in royal and temple libraries in cities like Istakhr and Ctesiphon, serving as the ultimate authority on matters of faith, law, and cosmology for the Sasanian state. The most dazzling expression of this Persian synthesis of knowledge came with the founding of the Academy of Gondeshapur in the 6th century AD by the Sasanian king Khosrow I. Gondeshapur was not merely a library, it was the world's first true university and an international research center of breathtaking ambition. The king's vision was to make it the global capital of wisdom, and to do so, he actively recruited the greatest minds from across the known world, offering them sanctuary and patronage. When the Byzantine Emperor Justinian closed the Platonic Academy in Athens in 529, Khosrow welcomed the exiled Greek Neoplatonist philosophers. He also invited Nestorian Christian scholars who had been persecuted for their theological views, and they brought with them their extensive knowledge of Greek medicine and philosophy, particularly the works of Galen and Aristotle. Alongside them were Indian scholars versed in mathematics, astronomy, and Ayurvedic medicine, and Jewish doctors contributing their own healing traditions. Gondeshapur became a melting pot where these diverse intellectual streams merged into a powerful new current of learning. The Academy's most famous and lasting achievement was in the field of medicine. It established a teaching hospital, a novel concept at the time where students could receive practical clinical training. The doctors of Gondeshapur synthesized the best practices from each tradition, the diagnostic methods of the Greeks, the surgical techniques of the Indians, and the herbal knowledge of the Persians. They produced encyclopedic medical texts that translated and commented on the works of Galen and Hippocrates, but also expanded upon them with their own discoveries. The atmosphere was one of rigorous, evidence-based inquiry, where knowledge was valued based on its efficacy, not its origin. This spirit of open, interdisciplinary collaboration, sponsored by the state, is a stunning model that would not be seen again in the West for over 1,000 years. The legacy of these ancient Persian libraries is not found in magnificent surviving buildings or vast collections of intact manuscripts. The Mongols sacked many of these cities, and time has crumbled their walls to dust. Their legacy is far more profound and enduring. It lives on in the very DNA of modern science and in the cultural memory of Iran. When the Islamic armies conquered Persia in the 7th century, they did not simply destroy this intellectual heritage, they absorbed it. The Abbasid caliphs in Baghdad, inspired by the model of Gondishapur, established their own house of wisdom. They actively sought out the texts that had been preserved in Persian libraries and commissioned their translation into Arabic. The medical knowledge synthesized at Gondishapur became the foundation for the works of the great Islamic physicians Al-Razi and Ibn Sina, whose textbooks would later become standard in European universities for centuries. The Persian system of administration, with its emphasis on detailed record-keeping and a centralized state archive, influenced the governance of subsequent Islamic empires. In modern Iran, this legacy is a deep source of national pride and cultural identity. The Persian language itself is a living library, filled with words and concepts that reflect this ancient scholarly tradition. The names of stars in the night sky, many of which are of Persian origin, are a silent homage to the astronomers of old. The country's continued emphasis on higher education and its strong tradition of engineering and medicine can be seen as a direct inheritance from a culture that for millennia has placed a premium on knowledge and intellectual achievement. While the physical scrolls and tablets may be gone, the spirit of Gondishap, or the belief that wisdom is borderless, that collaboration across cultures drives progress, and that preserving knowledge is the duty of a great civilization, remains an indelible part of the Iranian soul, a whisper from the ancient libraries that continues to shape the modern world. From the sealed caves of Dunhuang to the volcanic ash of Herculaneum, from the soaring halls of Constantinople to the remote cliffs of Mount Sinai, these hidden libraries have guarded the very flame of human knowledge through centuries of war, upheaval, and natural disaster. They stand as silent, resilient witnesses to our unending drive to understand our world and preserve that understanding against all odds. Each manuscript they protected, whether a Buddhist prayer on the Silk Road, a Greek philosophical text saved from the Roman ashes, or an astronomical chart from the Islamic Golden Age, is far more than an ancient relic. It is a vital thread in the vast, intricate tapestry of our shared human history, a tangible link to the ideas, dreams, and voices that have shaped civilizations and propelled our species forward. The stories of these libraries are not just tales of preservation, they are profound lessons in resilience. They teach us that knowledge is both incredibly fragile and astonishingly durable. It can be wiped out in a single act of violence or a moment of geological fury, yet it can also survive against all probability, hidden in plain sight for centuries, waiting for the right moment to be rediscovered. The survival of these institutions often hinged on the courage and dedication of individuals, monks who walled up their sacred texts, scholars who translated texts under patronage, librarians who guarded collections during sieges, and scribes who dedicated their lives to the painstaking work of copying. Their commitment reminds us that the safeguarding of culture is not a passive act but an active, deliberate choice, one that requires constant vigilance and an unwavering belief in the value of the past for the future. As we navigate our own digital age, with its unique challenges of information overload, digital decay, and the fragility of data stored on servers that could become obsolete in a generation, the lessons from these ancient libraries have never been more relevant. They compel us to ask ourselves what we are choosing to preserve today. What stories, what data, what digital artifacts will we leave for the generations to come? The physical endurance of a clay tablet, a parchment codex, or a knotted quipu offers a stark contrast to the fleeting nature of a tweet or a hard drive. Their stories inspire us to think critically about how we protect and cherish knowledge in all its forms, ensuring that the digital record of our own era does not become a forgotten, unreadable ghost in the machine. I am so curious to know which of these libraries resonated most with you. Was it the accidental time capsule of Dunhuang, the imperial ambition of Asher-Banepal, or the scholarly haven of Al-Karawayin? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I love reading about what captures your imagination. If you enjoyed this journey through the hallways of forgotten knowledge, please subscribe and hit the bell for more adventures into the mysteries of our past. Thank you for watching, and never forget that history's greatest secrets are rarely lost. Often, they are simply waiting, hidden in plain sight, for a curious mind to